When I was a kid, well, a young teenager, I frequently spent my Saturday nights babysitting my siblings. My name is Marcus, and back in 2006, I was just 13 years old. Not quite a child anymore, but far from being an adult. I lived with my parents and two siblings in a secluded house nestled in the mountains of Colorado, about 20 minutes outside of a small town called Pinewood. Our house was beautiful, a large two-story log cabin with a finished basement, surrounded by towering pines and aspens that looked magical when covered in snow. Life was simple back then. I went to Pinewood Middle School, maintained decent grades, and spent most of my free time reading or playing video games. I wasn't particularly popular, but I had a small group of friends who occasionally came over when my parents allowed it. They rarely did, though. Our house was too remote, and the winding mountain roads made most parents nervous, especially during winter. As the eldest of three, I assumed the responsibility of watching my siblings with no pay, nor thanks to speak of. It was simply expected of me, one of my contributions to the family. I babysat so frequently because, well, my parents needed it. They'd had marriage problems in the past, and their counselor told them they should go on a weekly date. Revive the magic, rekindle the flame, all that good stuff. I'd overheard them arguing late at night the previous year. Harsh whispers about finances, about dad's drinking, about mom feeling unappreciated. Then came the counseling, and eventually the mandatory date nights. Yeah, it sucked to be robbed of a weekend evening, but it wasn't much of a burden. My parents were happier than they'd been in ages, and they both seemed genuinely excited for date night each week. Dad would put on his one decent shirt, a navy button-up that Mom had ironed, and Mom would wear makeup and curl her hair. It was nice seeing them like that, almost like when I was younger. I would have rather been doing other things, of course, but I'd seen my aunt and uncle go through a nasty divorce a few years back, and I desperately wanted my parents to stick together. The memory of my cousins being shuttled between houses during holidays still haunted me. Their Christmas decorations had been split between two homes, half the ornaments at each place. I couldn't bear the thought of our family breaking apart like that. That winter had been particularly harsh. By late November, we'd already experienced 3 major snowstorms, and the forecast predicted more to come. Our house, perched on the side of a mountain and surrounded by dense forest, felt increasingly isolated with each snowfall. The narrow road leading to our property would ice over, making the drive treacherous. My dad had installed snow chains on both cars and kept emergency supplies in the trunks, just in case. And so it was that on the night of December 3rd, in the year 2006, I stood at the open front door of my secluded Colorado home, waving goodbye as my parents backed out of the icy driveway. "Drive safe," I called out, steam pouring from my mouth. I don't know if they heard me or not. Wrapping my arms around my torso in response to the wintry mountain air, I entertained myself for a few brief moments by exhaling forcefully and watching my breath float away into nothing. And there was truly nothing around me, not a car or a creature in sight. It wasn't long before I grew bored and turned back into the warm house, nose tingling from the chill. The garage door hummed shut behind their car, and I watched through the frosted window as their taillights disappeared around the bend, red glow fading into the darkness. In that moment, I felt a strange, inexplicable pang of dread, a sudden impulse to call them back. I almost rushed to the phone to ask them to stay, but I stopped myself. I was being childish. They deserved their night out, and I'd watched my siblings countless times before. Inside, the house was warm and inviting. Mom had left the fireplace crackling in the living room, and the Christmas tree glowed with multicolored lights in the corner. Our decorations were still half unpacked. Boxes of ornaments and garlands sat by the couch, waiting to be hung tomorrow when we'd all do it together as a family. Dad had managed to string up the outdoor lights along the eaves earlier that day, and they cast a festive glow through the windows onto the fresh snow. Georgie and Kate were eating their dinner at the kitchen table. As I watched them, I couldn't help feeling like an only child. Georgie, 3 years my junior, was severely autistic and not talkative. He only spoke when he really wanted something, and only then in the simplest of words. Milk and sandwich was code for peanut butter and jelly, with the crust cut off, which he was presently devouring. Kate, meanwhile, was still a baby, just shy of 2. The 9-year gap between them is glaring, but to this day, my parents swear to me Kate wasn't an accident. Kind of like back in high school, when I swore to them I had no idea how those magazines got under my mattress. I grabbed my own plate. Mom had left me a portion of homemade lasagna warming in the oven, and sat at the table with them. Georgie methodically cut his sandwich into perfect triangles, a ritual he performed with every meal. Kate smacked her high chair tray, sending a few Cheerios flying onto the floor. "Careful there, monster," I said, picking up the fallen cereal. She giggled and stuffed another handful in her mouth, her cheeks bulging like a chipmunk's. Through the kitchen window, I could see the snow beginning to fall again. Large, lazy flakes drifted past the yellow porch light, accumulating on the railing. The meteorologist had predicted another 6 inches overnight. Dad had asked Mr. Jensen from down the road to plow our driveway in the morning if it got too bad. But I digress. The kids finished dinner and I set them up with their entertainment for the night. Georgie in his room with the PlayStation 2, which was a hot commodity in those days, and Kate in her crib in front of Sesame Street. Myself, I ignited the basement fireplace, dimmed the overheads, and curled up with a book by the light of our Christmas tree. God, that was a nice house. Not a day goes by that I don't miss it. The basement was my favorite part of the house, a cozy den with plush carpeting, wood-paneled walls, and a small bathroom tucked in the corner. Dad had built most of it himself the summer before, working late into the evenings and on weekends. He'd installed the fireplace as a surprise for Mom's birthday. It was gas, not wood-burning, but it created the same warm, comforting ambiance. I was reading The Shining by Stephen King, probably not the best choice for a night alone in a secluded mountain home, but I'd always been drawn to horror. The irony doesn't escape me now. My English teacher, Mrs. Harding, had lent it to me, telling me it was a classic piece of American literature. My parents would have confiscated it if they'd known, too mature for a 13-year-old. But they trusted me not to watch R-rated movies, so they never thought to check my reading material. I read, in perfect contentment, for nearly an hour. Night had fallen by then, and the room had become toasty. I was beginning to doze off when I heard Georgie's heavy footfalls descending the staircase. I sat upright and looked at him expectantly as he waddled into the room. He stood in the doorway, his Batman pajamas slightly too small for his growing frame. His hair stuck up at odd angles, and his eyes, always so intense and focused, locked onto mine with an expression I couldn't quite read. "No more knocking," he said, brow furrowed in annoyance. My stomach did a small flip. I set my book down on the coffee table, keeping my place with a finger. I shook my head. "I'm not knocking," I said. "Is someone at the door?" Georgie just stared at me blankly. "Georgie," I said more clearly this time, "did someone knock on the door?" "No more knocking," he repeated, "knocking on window." A cold sensation spread through my chest, like ice water flowing through my veins. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my expression neutral. Georgie was sensitive to fear. If he sensed I was afraid, he'd become agitated. Knocking on window? I stood up, now wide awake. "Georgie, is someone knocking on your window?" "No more," he replied simply. I glanced at my watch. 8:43 p.m. My parents had been gone for less than 2 hours. They wouldn't be back until after 11. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I stood in silence for a moment, unsure of what to do. It was probably just one of my friends playing a prank, I thought. But being alone in a house that big makes you a little jumpy. My mind started to race through the situation. I was a 13-year-old boy in a nice house on the hilly outskirts of a Colorado mountain town. The streets were engulfed in trees, and there were no homes within a quarter-mile of my own. Our road saw next to no traffic, and the police station was a good 15 minutes away. It was probably my friends, I thought. But what if it wasn't? Jason and Tyler, my friends from school, had played pranks on me before, throwing snowballs at my window or hiding behind trees to jump out and scare me. But they lived in town, and neither of them could drive. Their parents certainly wouldn't have driven them all the way out here in a snowstorm just to play a joke. And even if they had, They would have come to the front door by now. I remembered the local news reporting a series of break-ins in nearby neighborhoods over the past month. Nothing violent, just theft of electronics, jewelry, and cash. Dad had installed new deadbolts on all the doors afterward, but Mom still worried. She'd taken to checking the lock on her jewelry box each night before bed. "Follow me," I told Georgie. I reached for his hand, and he allowed me to take it, his fingers cold and stiff in mine. We ascended the stairs together, Georgie taking each step deliberately as he always did. Hand trembling slightly, I turned the knob and glanced up the staircase. It was dark up there. The only light came from Kate's room. Kate. I sprinted up the stairs to her room, where she remained happily perched in her crib, squawking with delight as Elmo fiddled with his crayons. I breathed a sigh of relief, but still, my heart thumped in my chest. This is silly, I told myself. Be a man. Kate looked up at me and smiled, drool glistening on her chin. Her red curls bounced as she clapped along with the song on TV. The sight of her, so innocent and unaware, filled me with a fierce protectiveness. If there was someone outside, if someone was trying to get in, they'd have to go through me first. Georgie had followed me up the stairs and now stood in the doorway of Kate's room, watching me with curious eyes. I made my way down the hall to Georgie's room and stood tentatively at its door. Taking a deep breath, I gently pushed the door ajar, reaching for the light switch and thinking better of it. If this was the worst-case scenario, then I didn't want our mystery intruder to know where in the house I was. The only light in the room came from Star Wars, Battlefront's game-paused screen. I listened for a moment but heard nothing. I began to suspect that Georgie had simply imagined the knocking. Georgie's room was meticulously organized, as always. His toys were lined up on shelves by size and type, his books arranged by color rather than author or title. His bed was made with hospital corners, a skill Mom had taught him that he now executed with pedantic precision. The PlayStation controller lay on the floor where he dropped it, the game's blue light casting eerie shadows across the walls. I crossed the room, my socks silent on the hardwood floor. The curtains were partly drawn, revealing a strip of darkness beyond. I hesitated, suddenly afraid of what I might see. I could hear the wind picking up outside, branches scraping against the side of the house. It was probably nothing, just the wind or falling snow causing noises that Georgie had misinterpreted as knocking. Somewhat exasperatedly, I moved to the window and flicked up a blind to reveal nothing. Just a landscape of freshly fallen snow backed by a quiet, lonely road. I watched the peaceful night, relieved, as the large flakes fell softly to the ground, my eyes trailing an individual fractal all the way to the footprints just beneath the window's frame. My breath caught in my throat. The relief I'd felt seconds ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping fear that slithered up my spine. At first I did not comprehend them. I just stared, transfixed at the deep imprints in the snow. Shoes, a man's shoes. None of my friends wore the size, of that I felt sure. I traced them backwards from the window to the sidewalk, from whence this intruder had evidently come. But where did they lead? It was a bright night. The moon shone proudly between the clouds. My eyes followed the steps across the front yard, but once they passed behind the giant pine, they disappeared. My heart leapt to my throat. Whoever had walked behind that tree was still there. The footprints were fresh, the edges still sharp, not yet softened by falling snow. They led directly to the window, where they doubled back on themselves slightly, as if the person had stood there for a while, peering in. I imagined a face pressed against the glass, watching Georgie play his game, waiting for him to leave so they could... What, break in? My hands began to shake. In panic, I quickly backed away from the window. Georgie, sensing my fear, began to whimper. No, shh, I muttered, desperate to keep him quiet. I flicked the television off and led Georgie out of the room. I quickly pulled Kate from her crib, powered her TV down as well, and carried her down the stairs in the blackness. Kate squirmed in my arms, protesting the interruption of her show. "Elmo," she whined, reaching back toward her room. "Shh, we'll watch more Elmo later," I whispered, bouncing her lightly as we descended. My mind raced through our options. I needed to call the police, but the phone was in the kitchen, and the kitchen had large windows through which someone could easily see us. The basement seemed safer, more hidden. "Can't see," Georgie said, and Kate began to cry. I shushed her hurriedly as we descended. Once in the basement den, I unplugged the Christmas tree so that the only light in the room came from the embers of the dying fire. I sat Georgie down on the couch and settled Kate in his arms. The fireplace cast a dim orange glow across the room. Shadows danced on the walls, and the wind moaned through the eaves above. I could hear the creaking of the house as it settled, each sound amplified by my heightened senses. Kate whimpered, and Georgie began to rock back and forth, a self-soothing behavior he often exhibited when stressed. "Sit right here," I directed, staring into his eyes. "Don't move. Do you understand? Do not move." I reached for the baseball bat Dad kept in the corner, running my fingers along the smooth wood. The weight of it in my hands was reassuring. I thought of calling out, warning whoever was out there that we were armed, that they should leave. But if they didn't know we'd seen them, maybe they'd just go away. I need to call the police. I would have called my parents, but this was 10 years ago, and they didn't have cell phones, so I took the stairs quickly and quietly, tiptoeing to the phone hanging from the wall of our living room. I picked up the phone and dialed 911, but I heard nothing. Silence. I slammed it on the receiver and picked it up again. Again. Nothing. I pressed the receiver against my ear, desperately listening for a dial tone, a click, any sound at all. Nothing. The line was dead. I jiggled the cord where it connected to the wall, hoping it was just loose, but the silence persisted. Someone had cut the phone line. I think it was around this point that I started to cry. I couldn't help it. I was scared. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that the storm had killed the phone line. But there wasn't much of a storm. The snow was steady, sure, but there wasn't even a breeze. Certainly nothing that could have disabled our phone. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, trying to think clearly. Mom kept her cell phone in her purse, which she'd taken with her. Dad's was probably in his pocket. There was no way to contact them. The nearest neighbor, the Westons, lived a quarter-mile down the road. If I could get the kids there safely, we could call for help. But that would mean going outside, walking past that pine tree where someone was hiding, and we'd have to go through the snow in our socks and pajamas. Kate would freeze before we made it halfway. Tentatively, I walked into Kate's room and peeked out the window. My first glance was toward the tree, of course, where the footprints stopped. But now they continued. Sometime while I was herding my siblings downstairs, whoever was behind the tree had moved. I followed the footsteps across my frozen front yard to a man standing near the driveway. He was looking right at me. He was tall and gaunt, his body a dark silhouette against the snow. His face was pale, almost luminous in the moonlight, with sunken cheeks and eyes that seemed too large for his face. He wasn't dressed for the weather, no coat, no hat, just dark clothes that hung loosely on his thin frame. And he was staring directly at my window, as if he'd been waiting for me to appear. My breath stopped. I was frozen in place. This was not one of my friends. I had never seen this man before, but he was looking at me with an eerie blankness. He was wearing a black turtleneck and black slacks, a lone dark spot on a blanket of purest white. My eyes never left him, and his never left me. His gaze was unblinking, unnerving in its intensity. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call out. He just stood there, watching. I couldn't see if he was holding anything, a weapon, a tool. His hands were obscured by the darkness. But there was something profoundly wrong about him, something that made my skin crawl and my throat constrict. We stood still, silently staring, for what seemed like an eternity. My heart thrummed in my chest, and I felt nauseous. For the first time, gazing into this man's eyes from afar, I began to consider the possibility of my death. I thought of my dad's brother, who was killed in an accident at age 11. Forever 11, never growing up, frozen in time, in the memories of all who knew him, as a soul of eternal youth. At this, the tears flowed freely once more. "Please don't hurt us," I begged in a sobbing whisper. I knew he could not hear me. But I could not help myself. I thought of my parents coming home to find us gone, or worse. I imagined the police cars, the yellow tape, the solemn officers explaining what had happened. Would they blame themselves for leaving us alone? Would they ever recover? The thought was unbearable. I should move away from the window, I thought. I should hide. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the man. It was as if we were locked in some bizarre, silent conversation. Him asking a question I couldn't comprehend, me pleading for mercy he didn't seem inclined to give. Finally, he broke eye contact with me and looked toward the heavens, toward the gently falling snow. He was saying something, but what? I could not hear. I stared, transfixed, as he pulled a handful of dark powder from his pocket. Then, still gazing upward, still muttering to himself, he flung the stuff at his feet. It scattered across the snow like ash, forming a rough circle around him. He reached into his pocket again, pulling out more of the dark substance, repeating the process until he stood in the center of a perfect black ring against the white ground. His lips continued to move, faster now, more urgent. I desperately wanted to run, to get my siblings, but I thought that to let this man out of my sight would be unconscionably foolish. No, better to keep an eye on him. The house was still locked. I had the upper hand, I felt. Besides, I could not bring myself to look away from the strange ritual unfolding before me. What was he doing? Was this some kind of prank after all? A bizarre performance art piece? But no, the look in his eyes was too intense, too disturbed. This wasn't normal behavior. This was something else entirely. The man had removed his sweater and flung it carelessly to the ground behind him. He was no longer staring skyward, but his lips continued to move. I trained my eyes intently upon his mouth, trying with no success to read his words, when I saw something glint in the moonlight. It was a knife, a long, callous blade, which he had removed from his other pocket. It bore dark stains already. From what? I covered my mouth to hush a scream as the man, still muttering to himself, ran the edge of the blade along his pale, distended stomach. The knife moved slowly, deliberately, across his flesh. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. His face remained serene, almost peaceful, as the blade bit into his skin. I wanted to look away, but couldn't. My entire body trembled with revulsion and fear. A thin red line appeared along his abdomen, and blood of the deepest shade began to dribble from the wound. The streams trickled down his belly and fell ungracefully upon the black powder at his feet. At this, the man stared skyward once more, face contorted in a gruesome smile. He was sobbing uncontrollably, and mucus ran freely from his nostrils. But he looked happy, beyond happy, elated. My stomach churned in revulsion. This man was in ecstasy, his arms spread wide, embracing the falling snow, his face upturned to the sky. Blood continued to flow from the wound on his stomach, staining the snow beneath him. The black powder seemed to absorb it, darkening further, while the man's lips moved in what looked like a prayer or incantation. His body swayed slightly, as if moved by an unfelt breeze. I should call the police, I thought desperately. But the phone was dead. I should hide the kids, get them somewhere safe. But I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the grotesque spectacle outside our home. I watched, almost entranced by this bizarre unfolding, when the man's face changed suddenly. He looked directly at me once more, and his eyes appeared unhinged. Still clutching the knife, he began to sprint directly at my window. The change was so abrupt, so unexpected, that I stumbled backward in shock. One moment he had been in a trance-like state. The next he was charging toward me with inhuman speed, his face contorted in rage or madness or both. The knife glinted in his hand, catching the moonlight as he ran. I took one look at the weapon this man brandished and instinctively fled the room. I slammed the door shut behind me and was halfway down the stairs when I heard the window shatter. The man screamed loudly in pain as I reached the basement. I locked the door behind me and ran to Georgie and Kate. Glass exploded inward as the man hurled himself through the window. The sound echoed through the house, a violent, jarring crash followed by his scream. Had he cut himself on the glass? Was he stuck in the window frame? I didn't wait to find out. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, taking the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling in my haste. The basement door had a lock, a simple push button in the knob. that wouldn't keep him out for long, but might buy us precious seconds. I turned it with shaking fingers, then rushed to where my siblings sat huddled on the couch. Georgie's eyes were wide with fear, and Kate whimpered in his arms, sensing the tension. "No more screaming," Georgie pleaded. "No, no more screaming," I agreed in hushed tones, stroking his hair in an effort to calm him down. Kate, meanwhile, seemed happy as a clam. I pressed my ear against the basement door, listening for movement above. Was he searching the rooms? Had he seen me run downstairs? The house had gone eerily quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no sounds of destruction. Maybe he'd injured himself badly enough to leave. Maybe he'd given up and gone away. I strained, listening intently. Is he inside the house? I still clung to some naive hope that he had injured himself on the glass and had retreated, or perhaps he had been weakened by his self-inflicted wound. Finally, I heard it, the subtle but unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. He was indeed inside the house, and by the sound of it, was trying to be quiet. The footsteps moved methodically from room to room, Kate's first, then Georgie's, then my parents' at the end of the hall. Doors opened and closed, drawers slid open. Objects clattered to the floor. He was searching for something, or someone. I silently guided Georgie and Kate into a storage closet and closed the door behind us, manipulating the handle to make as little noise as possible. We stayed there for about 5 minutes, listening to the ceiling creak threateningly above us. Then I realized, I don't know why it took me so long, that we were not trapped. We still had a way out. I saw in my mind's eye a window well in the bathroom down the hall, the only access our basement had to the outside world. The storage closet was cramped and dusty, filled with holiday decorations and old sporting equipment. Kate squirmed in my arms, uncomfortable in the confined space. Georgie breathed heavily, his anxiety mounting. I placed a finger to my lips, silently begging them both to remain quiet. The basement bathroom window was small, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, but it opened into a window well that led to the backyard. If we could get through it, we could run to the Weston's house without the man seeing us. It was our only chance. Almost as if on cue, a frustrated scream echoed from above, followed by a tremendous crash. He had pulled something to the ground, perhaps the entertainment stand, or maybe the hutch. "He's here!" the man shrieked hysterically. "How dare you hide from him!" His voice was high-pitched, unhinged, echoing through the vents. The crash was followed by another, and another. He was destroying the house, tearing it apart in his search for us. Kate began to cry, and I pressed her face against my shoulder to muffle the sound. To this day, I don't know who he was talking about. Was there someone else with him? Another intruder we hadn't seen? Or was he referring to himself in the third person, a sign of his disturbed mental state? Either way, the rage in his voice sent shivers down my spine. But it was at that moment, the moment I heard him begin to descend the stairs, that I made my move. Holding Kate in one arm and guiding Georgie with the other, we began our flight down the hallway. As we reached the bathroom, I stared fixedly at the window near the ceiling. It would be a tight fit, but we could make it. The bathroom was cold, the tile floor like ice beneath our bare feet. The window was higher than I remembered, positioned above the toilet tank. We'd need to stand on the toilet to reach it, then somehow hoist ourselves up and out. I could hear the man trying the basement door now, rattling the knob violently. I flung the window open, stood on the toilet, and placed Kate gently in the shallow window well. Then I stepped off and told Georgie to get on. "Yucky gross. No standing on toilet," he said, looking embarrassed. He shifted from foot to foot, his face contorted in distress. Georgie had strict rules about certain things, one of which was proper bathroom behavior. Standing on the toilet was firmly against those rules. Under normal circumstances, I would have explained, cajoled, reasoned with him. But we didn't have time. I heard the man fumble with the locked handle at the base of the stairs. Time was running out. I'm not proud of what I did next, but it was the only way I could think of to get Georgie to cooperate. I smacked my brother roughly across the face and grabbed him by the shirt with both hands. "Georgie, get on the fucking toilet," I snarled at him, the first time I had ever said that word. He began to wail in pain and surprise, but he did step onto the toilet all the same. Tears streamed down his face as he obeyed, more from shock than pain. I hadn't hit him hard, but I'd never laid a hand on him before. The guilt was instantaneous and overwhelming, but there was no time for apologies. The basement door shuddered as the man threw his weight against it. The lock wouldn't hold much longer. "Climb out the window," I directed in a harsh tone, and as he grabbed the ledge, I used all the strength I could muster to help push him up. Once he almost slipped back down, almost, but he was stronger than I thought he was, and managed to pull himself back up. With both of my siblings safely in the window well, I climbed on the toilet one last time and gripped the edge of the windowsill. I could hear the splintering of wood as the door began to give way. The man was shouting now, his words incomprehensible, but his tone filled with rage. I heaved myself upward, my arms straining with the effort. For a terrifying moment, I thought I wouldn't make it, that I'd be stuck half in, half out of the window when he broke through. As I clambered out myself, I heard a raucous crash. The man had broken down the basement door. With one last hoist, I pulled my legs up through the window and shut it quietly behind me. As I helped my siblings out of the well, I heard one last anguished shout from the man, muffled through the pane of glass. "Why are you hiding from him?" The night air hit us like a physical blow, the cold so intense it stole our breath away. The snow was still falling, heavier now, and the wind had picked up. Kate shivered violently in my arms, her thin pajamas no protection against the elements. Georgie stood beside me, barefoot in the snow, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Cold!" screamed Georgie as I led him barefoot through the snowy grass. In panic, I shushed him, but it was no use. He and Kate were both crying quite loudly by this point. We needed to move quickly. The window well was on the side of the house, out of sight from the driveway where I'd last seen the man performing his ritual. But if he looked out any window, he'd spot our tracks in the snow. And if he heard Georgie's cries, he'd know exactly where we were. My only hope was to get them as far away from the house as possible. I heard a distant crash from inside the house, and I quickened our pace. Feet numb, I sprinted through the yard to the sidewalk and practically had to drag Georgie onto it. The sidewalk hadn't been shoveled since the last snowfall, and the fresh powder concealed patches of ice beneath. I slipped twice, nearly dropping Kate, who wailed louder with each jolt. Georgie trudged behind me, his movements becoming slower, more labored. The cold was affecting him worse than us. His feet must have been in agony. "Bathroom light on," he said pleadingly. He was obsessive about turning off lights and electronics before leaving, and he was correct. We had left the bathroom light on in our haste. I ignored him and rushed us down the frozen pavement, stepping on sharp rocks and sticks, and not even comprehending it. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I didn't know what we were headed toward. All I knew is what we were headed away from. The road stretched before us, illuminated only by the moonlight reflecting off the snow. No cars passed. Who would be driving in this weather, on this remote road, at this hour? The trees on either side created dark shadows, places where someone could hide, watching us. I imagined the man following our tracks, knife in hand, and pushed myself to move faster. The snow was falling much harder by this point. I could already see it collecting in a pile on Kate's head. Her nose was beet red and dripping with snot. I needed to get her inside. But where? I looked ahead and saw a light off in the distance. The Weston's house. I'd said maybe a grand total of 6 words to Mr. and Mrs. Weston my entire life, but that was our one option. It was in their house that we would seek refuge. Their property was visible now, a Victorian-style home with a wraparound porch, every window glowing with warm light. It looked like a postcard, so inviting compared to the freezing darkness surrounding us. Just a few more minutes, I told myself. Just a little further. My house was now around the corner and out of sight, but I did not let up the pace until Georgie tripped on something and landed in a dark puddle. "Hey!" he screamed indignantly, looking back at his stumbling block. In the glow of the distant streetlight, I could see Georgie had fallen into blood. A dead man lay, face up and eyes open, on the sidewalk. Snow had fallen onto most of him, and he had been mostly invisible until Georgie's feet had connected with his midsection. I remembered the dark stain I had seen on our intruder's knife. The man's face was frozen in an expression of surprise, his eyes staring blindly at the sky. Blood had pooled around him, creating the dark puddle Georgie had fallen into. It had begun to freeze at the edges, forming a grotesque frame around the body. He was dressed in heavy winter clothes, a down jacket, insulated pants, boots, the kind of outerwear appropriate for a snowy night. So different from our intruder's thin black clothing. I recognized him with a jolt of horror, Mr. Terrence, who lived 2 streets over. He sometimes played poker with my dad on Thursday nights. He had a daughter in high school and a son in college. And now he was dead, his throat slashed so deeply I could see the white of bone beneath the dark, congealing blood. "Come on," I pled, wrenching my eyes away from the grisly scene as I pulled Georgie to his feet. We ran for another 60 seconds, maybe, and finally reached the Westons' front door. The window into their parlor was open and a fire was roaring. Mr. and Mrs. Weston sat drinking tea in cozy armchairs. I pounded ferociously on their door. They answered together, utter bewilderment stamped on their faces. Mrs. Weston, a plump woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, gasped at the sight of us. 3 children in pajamas covered in snow, one of us smeared with blood. Her husband, tall and thin with a neatly trimmed beard, reached for us immediately, pulling us inside. I handed Kate to Mrs. Weston and collapsed into tears. "Good heavens," Mrs. Weston exclaimed, cradling Kate against her chest. "What on earth happened? Where are your parents?" Between sobs, I managed to tell them everything. The knocking, the footprints, the man with the knife, the ritual in the snow, the break-in, and finally, Mr. Terrence's body on the sidewalk. Mr. Weston's face grew grave as I spoke. He led Georgie to the couch, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders, then picked up the phone to call the police. "Yes, this is an emergency," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "There's been a break-in and possibly a murder on Pine Ridge Road. 3 children just showed up at my door." Mrs. Weston brought us hot chocolate and more blankets, tutting over Kate's cold hands and Georgie's bare feet. She examined them for frostbite, then wrapped them in warm towels. Georgie had stopped crying and now sat in silence, rocking slightly, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance. The shock had overwhelmed him. The police arrived at my home 15 minutes later and apprehended the man, unconscious, lying in a crumpled heap on the floor of our basement bathroom. They discovered him with a fractured skull, many deep lacerations from the window of Kate's room, and intestines partially protruding from the wound on his gut. He had slipped in his attempt to climb where we had climbed, hit his head, and knocked himself out. The officers who responded were visibly disturbed by what they found. Our house had been ransacked, furniture overturned, walls smeared with blood, both the intruders and what they assumed was Mr. Terrence's, strange symbols drawn on the mirrors. In Georgie's room, they discovered a circle of black powder, the same substance the man had scattered outside, drawn around his bed. 4 police cars and an ambulance lined our street, their lights flashing against the falling snow. The neighbors, what few we had, stood in their doorways, watching as the paramedics loaded the unconscious intruder onto a stretcher. A separate coroner's van arrived for Mr. Terrence's body, which they covered with a sheet before carrying it away. Apparently he confessed under questioning that he was a member of a strange cult, a cult which, as far as anyone can tell, does not even exist. He claimed to have been taking part in a ritual which required the sacrifice of a pure soul, and my autistic brother had been his target that night. My parents have not shared with me all the details of what happened after that night, but as far as I know, our intruder is currently rotting in a cell. The cult, he claimed, worshipped an entity they called the Watcher, a being that existed between worlds and fed on innocence. Georgie's autism made him a perfect vessel, a pure soul, untainted by society's corruption. The ritual the man had been performing was meant to prepare himself as a conduit for the Watcher to enter our world through Georgie. The police psychologist later determined that the man, whose name was Benjamin Keller, suffered from severe schizophrenia and had fabricated the entire cult mythology. There were no other members, no ancient texts, no rituals beyond what his disturbed mind had created. He had been living in an abandoned cabin in the woods behind our neighborhood for months, watching children through windows, planning his sacrifice. The man he killed, the man lying on the sidewalk, was a friend of my father who lived 2 streets over. He had called his wife on his cell phone not long before he died, informing her of a suspicious man dressed in black, stalking around the neighborhood. Mr. Terrence had been walking his dog when he spotted Keller lurking near our house. He'd called his wife, telling her to alert the police, then approached Keller himself. His dog had run home without him, barking frantically at their door. Mrs. Terrence found it strange, but assumed her husband would be right behind. When he didn't return after 20 minutes, she called the police. But by then it was too late. My parents arrived home from their date to find police swarmed around the block and their home a crime scene. My father relocated at work, and we had moved across the Rockies to Salt Lake City just 2 weeks later. Mom and Dad rushed into the Westons' house, faces pale with terror. Mom gathered Kate and Georgie in her arms, sobbing as she checked them for injuries. Dad pulled me into a fierce hug, his body shaking. "You saved them," he whispered against my hair. "You saved your brother and sister." The detective who interviewed me called me a hero. The local newspaper ran a small story about the incident, careful to protect our identities but praising the quick thinking of a teenage boy who had saved his siblings from a dangerous intruder. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a scared kid who had narrowly escaped death. We stayed in a hotel for the remainder of December. Our house, once a warm, inviting home, had become a place of nightmares. Mom couldn't bear to go back inside, not even to collect our belongings. Dad went once with a police escort to gather essential items and some Christmas presents he'd hidden in the garage. The rest we left behind, too tainted by what had happened to bring with us. Dad accepted a job transfer to Salt Lake City, something he'd been offered before but had declined. Now he jumped at the opportunity to move us far away from the memories of that night. We found a new house in a busy suburb, with neighbors on all sides and streetlights illuminating every corner. No more seclusion, no more darkness. Kate is now a bratty middle schooler. As far as I'm concerned, she's perfect. Georgie, now 21, hasn't changed a bit, but he loses his mind if someone knocks on a window. As for me, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie now. I climb mountains with narrow trails and steep ridges. I go cave diving in places where you shouldn't. All, I think, in an attempt to recreate the fearful intensity of that one snowy night long ago. But it never works. The closest I come is when I'm alone, in my room, in the dead of night. Kate remembers nothing of that night. She was too young. But sometimes she wakes up crying from nightmares she can't describe. Georgie's therapist says his window-knocking phobia is likely a direct result of the trauma, one of the few clear memories his mind retained from that night. My parents never went on another date night until both Kate and Georgie were in high school, and even then, they called to check on us every 30 minutes. As for me, I graduated college with a degree in psychology, specializing in trauma and its effects on developing minds. I volunteer at a crisis center on weekends, talking to scared kids who remind me too much of myself at 13. I've tried conventional therapy, but nothing seems to help with the nightmares, the persistent feeling of being watched, the way my heart races whenever I hear knocking. My therapist calls it post-traumatic stress disorder. My friends call it an overactive imagination. I call it remembering, because forgetting would mean dishonoring Mr. Terrence's sacrifice and the strength I found in myself that night to protect what I loved most. Sometimes, on snowy December nights, I find myself staring out windows, watching the flakes fall, remembering how it felt to see those footprints leading to my brother's window. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of a thin figure standing beneath a distant tree, looking up at the sky, lips moving in a silent prayer. But when I blink, it's gone. Just a trick of the moonlight on falling snow. At least that's what I tell myself. Because the alternative, that he wasn't alone, that there were others who believe as he did, that they're still out there watching and waiting, is too terrible to contemplate. Especially on nights like tonight, when I'm alone in the dark, listening to the wind scratch at my window like fingernails on glass, wondering if that sound I just heard was a footstep on the stairs. The rain hammered against my windshield as I drove home from work, each droplet another reminder of how exhausted I felt. It was early April, and the spring showers had been relentless for days now. My wipers struggled against the downpour, the rhythmic scraping almost hypnotic as I navigated the rural roads leading to my home. My job as a forest ranger at the state park required me to split my time between indoor administrative work and outdoor field operations. Today had been particularly brutal. The rain had soaked through my uniform within minutes of stepping outside, and I'd spent the better part of my shift clearing fallen branches from trails and checking on the condition of the park's infrastructure. By the time my shift ended at 6 p.m., my muscles ached and my boots squelched with every step. The drive home took 30 minutes on a good day. Today, with sheets of rain reducing visibility and causing me to slow at every curve, it felt much longer. I lived in what locals called the Sticks, a secluded property nestled among dense woods about 15 miles from the nearest town. Most days, I appreciated the solitude. The peaceful isolation was what had drawn me to the property in the first place. As I finally turned onto my private driveway, the headlights illuminated the narrow dirt path, now transformed into a muddy slick from the persistent rain. I downshifted and cautiously navigated the familiar route, when something unusual caught my attention. There were fresh tire tracks in the mud. They weren't my own. I could see where another vehicle had pressed deep treads into the soft earth, clearly made after the rain had begun, but before I arrived. I frowned, trying to think who might have visited. I wasn't expecting anyone, and friends rarely dropped by unannounced, especially not in this weather and this far out. Probably just a delivery, I muttered to myself, though even as I said it aloud, something felt off about the explanation. As I pulled up to my modest two-story home, my headlights swept across the front yard. The tracks continued all the way to the house, then curved in a three-point turn pattern before heading back out. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the rain drumming on the roof of my truck, watching water stream down the windshield. I grabbed my work bag, took a deep breath, and made a dash for the front porch. Once under the shelter of the overhang, I shook the worst of the water from my jacket and unlocked the door. The familiar creak of the hinges welcomed me home as I stepped inside and flicked on the lights. Everything looked normal. The living room was just as I'd left it this morning. Coffee mug still on the side table, book splayed open where I'd abandoned it. I kicked off my sodden boots by the door and placed them on the mat to dry. "Hello?" I called out, feeling slightly foolish. Of course, no one was here. I checked the doorstep and mailbox. No packages, no deliveries. No mail either, but that wasn't unusual. The rural postal service was spotty at best, especially in bad weather. Still, it was strange that someone had driven all the way down my isolated driveway, only to turn around and leave. Wrong address, probably, I reasoned aloud, my voice sounding oddly small in the quiet house. GPS sends people down the wrong roads all the time out here. I peeled off my damp uniform, tossing it into the laundry hamper in the bathroom. A hot shower later, dressed in dry sweatpants and a comfortable hoodie, I felt somewhat human again. The digital clock on the microwave read 6:47 p.m. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since the hasty sandwich I'd wolfed down during my lunch break. The refrigerator offered limited options. I settled on pasta, simple and quick. As the water boiled on the stove, I glanced out the kitchen window into the backyard. The rain continued to fall in sheets, obscuring the tree line beyond my property. Something about the darkness out there made me uneasy tonight. I drew the curtains closed. While my dinner cooked, I moved to the living room and turned on the television for background noise. The weather report confirmed what I already knew. The storm system would continue through the night. Great. I ate my pasta on the couch, half watching some crime drama while scrolling through my phone. The show's plot, something about a detective tracking a stalker, seemed to hit too close to home tonight, given my strange feeling about those tire tracks. I changed the channel to a cooking competition instead. By 7:30 p.m., I had finished eating and was answering emails on my phone. The house creaked and settled around me, the familiar sounds mixing with the pattering rain and rumbling thunder outside. Despite the shower and food, fatigue still weighed heavily on me. I was considering turning in early when I heard it, a knock. It was so faint, I almost missed it, a single soft rap that seemed to come from the front door. I froze, looking up from my phone. Had I imagined it? The wind had been gusting all evening, throwing branches and debris against the house. But this had sounded different, deliberate. I muted the TV and listened intently. 10 seconds passed, 20, nothing but the rain and thunder. Just the wind, I told myself, but I was already getting up to check. Better to be certain. I crossed the house to the front entrance, flicked on the porch light, and peered through the peephole. The porch appeared empty, rainwater streaming down the steps. I hesitated, then opened the door. The wind immediately assaulted me, driving cold rain into my face. I squinted against the onslaught, scanning the darkness. The porch was indeed empty. I looked beyond, toward where my truck was parked, but saw nothing unusual in the dim glow of the security light. After another moment, I closed the door, securing both the regular lock and the deadbolt. As I turned to head back to the living room, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the rain that had sprayed me. Those tire tracks in the driveway, the strange knock at the door, and now, as lightning briefly illuminated the front windows, I noticed something I'd missed before. Wet footprints on the welcome mat inside my door. Prints that weren't mine. I stared at the footprints, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest. They were smaller than mine would be, and they faced inward toward the house. They couldn't have been there when I arrived. I would have noticed them when I came in and removed my boots, which meant someone had entered my house while I was here. "Hello?" I called out, my voice stronger and more demanding than before. "Is someone here?" The house replied with silence, broken only by the ambient sounds of the storm and the muted voices from the television in the living room. I stood frozen for several seconds, unsure what to do. Call the police? But what would I tell them? That I found mysterious footprints in my own home? That someone knocked on my door and disappeared? I needed to check the house first, confirm whether my mind was playing tricks on me or if there was actually cause for alarm. Starting with the ground floor, I moved cautiously from room to room. The open-concept kitchen and living room showed no signs of disturbance. The half-bathroom off the hall was empty, the shower curtain pulled back, revealing nothing but porcelain and tile. My home office, rarely used and perpetually dusty, appeared untouched. As I completed my circuit of the first floor, I began to feel slightly foolish. Perhaps the footprints were my own after all, tracked in from an earlier trip outside that I'd forgotten about. The knock could easily have been the wind throwing a branch against the door. I returned to the living room, determined to shake off my unease. The clock now read 8:13 p.m. I settled back onto the couch, though I kept the TV muted, still listening for any unusual sounds. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The storm continued outside, occasionally brightening the room with flashes of lightning, followed by the low rumble of thunder. My nerves began to settle. I turned the volume back on the television and tried to focus on the show. It was just after 9 p.m. when I decided to get up and use the bathroom. I set my phone down on the coffee table and stood, stretching my stiff muscles. As I turned to walk around the couch, something caught my eye. There, on the white tile floor behind the couch, was a small, dark smudge. I froze, staring at it. It looked like mud, the same kind of mud that would be on someone's shoes after walking up my driveway in the rain. I knew with absolute certainty that it hadn't been there earlier. I also knew I hadn't walked through that area with my shoes on. I always removed them at the door. My mouth went dry. I approached the spot cautiously, as though it might somehow be dangerous. Kneeling down, I examined it more closely. It was definitely fresh mud, still slightly damp. I touched it with my finger, and a chill ran through me. Someone had been standing behind my couch, watching me. I quickly wiped up the mud with a tissue, my hands trembling slightly. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The tire tracks, the knock, the footprints, and now this. They weren't coincidences. They weren't my imagination. Someone had been to my house earlier today. Finding it empty, they'd left, only to return later. They'd entered while I was showering or making dinner, and they'd been moving around my house while I sat oblivious on the couch. But why? And more importantly, were they still here? I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, ready to call 911, then hesitated. Again, what would I tell them? That I found a muddy footprint in my house? I had no proof of a break-in, no missing items, no direct threat. And given my remote location, it would take deputies at least 15 minutes to arrive, even if they took me seriously. Instead, I opened the phone's camera and quietly began taking pictures of the evidence. The footprints by the door, the mud spot behind the couch. Documentation first, then another, more thorough search of the house. The sound of the rain intensified, rattling against the windows with renewed force. A particularly bright flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that made me jump. The storm was directly overhead now. I took a deep breath to steady myself. "You're overreacting," I whispered, though I didn't believe it. "Check upstairs, then decide whether to call the police." The staircase creaked under my weight as I ascended to the second floor. At the top landing, I paused and listened. The upper level consisted of my bedroom, a full bathroom, and a spare room I'd converted into a small home library and office space. All 3 doors were closed, just as I typically left them. Or were they? I tried to remember if I'd been upstairs at all since arriving home. Had I closed these doors this morning before leaving for work? I couldn't be certain. I checked the bathroom first, empty. Next, my bedroom. I pushed the door open slowly, flicking on the light. The room appeared undisturbed, my bed still neatly made from this morning. The closet door was ajar, but that wasn't unusual. I approached it cautiously and pulled it fully open. Just clothes and shoes, nothing out of place. Only the spare room remained. I stood outside the door, listening, nothing but the storm. Yet something kept me from opening it immediately. A feeling, an instinct, the same kind of instinct that alerts prey animals to the presence of predators they cannot see. Someone was in there. I was almost certain of it. I could retreat downstairs, call 911, and wait for help to arrive. That would be the sensible thing to do. Instead, emboldened by a surge of anger at this invasion of my home, I grasped the doorknob and threw the door open. The spare room was dark. I fumbled for the light switch, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure anyone in the vicinity could hear it. The overhead light flickered on, revealing a room that appeared empty at first glance. Bookshelves lined one wall, my small desk occupied another, and a comfortable reading chair sat in the corner. I scanned the space carefully. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. The closet door was closed. Could someone be hiding inside? With cautious steps, I approached the closet. My hand hovered over the doorknob as scenarios flashed through my mind. Opening the door to find nothing, or worse, opening it to find someone waiting. The latter thought sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through my system. Taking a deep breath, I yanked the door open, immediately stepping backward. Empty. The closet contained only storage boxes and off-season clothes. I exhaled a shaky breath, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. If no one was upstairs, then where had the mud behind the couch come from? Were they downstairs, moving around while I searched up here? A powerful gust of wind rattled the windows, startling me. I needed to get a grip. Maybe there was a rational explanation for everything. Maybe I had tracked in the mud myself without realizing it. Maybe the footprints by the door were older than I thought. But even as I tried to rationalize the situation, I knew something was wrong. The feeling of being watched persisted, raising goosebumps on my skin. I decided to head back downstairs. The spare room and my bedroom both had windows that opened onto the roof of the back porch. Difficult but not impossible to access from outside. I checked that both were locked securely before leaving the upstairs. As I descended the staircase, a sudden, sharp noise made me freeze mid-step. It had come from the living room, a muted thump, like something being set down or someone bumping into furniture. I held my breath, listening intently. 10 seconds passed. 20, nothing but the storm. Had I imagined it? The wind was causing the house to creak and settle. That must have been what I heard. Proceeding with caution, I reached the bottom of the stairs and peered into the living room. Everything looked as I had left it. The television still played, though I had left it muted. The couch was empty, my phone still on the coffee table. I picked up my phone, considering again whether to call the police. My thumb hovered over the emergency call button. What was I waiting for? Permission? More evidence? For someone to jump out and confirm my fears? A notification on my phone distracted me, a severe weather alert warning of flash floods in the area. Great. Even if I called for help, the storm might prevent or at least delay their arrival. I needed a weapon, something to defend myself with if it came to that. I moved to the kitchen, selected a large chef's knife from the block, and returned to the living room. The solid weight of it in my hand provided some comfort. The time was now approaching 10 p.m. I hadn't heard or seen anything definitive since finding the mud spot, but the feeling of wrongness persisted. I couldn't shake the sensation of being observed. I decided to do another sweep of the downstairs, this time checking less obvious hiding spots, under furniture, behind curtains. Inside the rarely opened coat closet, nothing. By 10:30 p.m., I had thoroughly searched every conceivable hiding place on the ground floor. Finding nothing had not reassured me. If anything, I felt more on edge. Where had the intruder gone? Had they slipped out while I was upstairs? Were they somehow still hiding, watching my increasingly frantic search with amusement? The storm showed no signs of abating. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled through the trees surrounding my property. The weather seemed to mirror my internal state, turbulent, unpredictable, threatening. I returned to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, knife still in hand. The television continued to play, though I wasn't processing anything on the screen. My attention was focused entirely on listening, watching, waiting for any sign of an intruder. Time passed agonizingly slowly. Each creak of the house, each rattle of the windows, each distant rumble of thunder sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my system. I couldn't continue like this all night. I needed to either convince myself I was safe or commit to calling for help, despite the potential embarrassment if nothing was found. Just as I had nearly talked myself into making the call, it happened. A distinctive noise came from the kitchen, the sound of metal softly contacting metal, like someone accidentally brushing against the hanging pots above the island. It was faint, but unmistakable. I rose silently from the couch, knife gripped tightly. The kitchen was dark. I had turned off the lights during my earlier search. I could make out the shapes of appliances and countertops, but not much else. Was someone in there, hidden in the shadows? "I know you're here," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "The police are on their way." Silence was the only response. I inched closer to the kitchen entryway, knife held before me. Should I turn on the light? Or would that make me an easier target? Before I could decide, a new sound emerged. Footsteps, soft but distinct, moving across the tile floor of the kitchen toward the back of the house. Then the unmistakable sound of the back door opening. They were leaving. I rushed to the kitchen and flipped on the lights in time to see the back door closing. I ran to it, yanked it open, and peered out into the rain-soaked darkness of my backyard. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the yard and the tree line beyond, but I saw no one. I closed and locked the door, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and relief. They were gone for now. But they had been here, in my house, moving around while I searched for them. The realization made me nauseous. This time I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was clear and professional. I need to report an intruder, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Someone broke into my house. I think they just left, but they were inside while I was home. Are you safe right now? Are you injured? I'm not hurt. I think they're gone, but I'm not sure. I gave her my address and answered her questions as calmly as I could. Yes, I was alone. No, I hadn't seen the intruder directly. No, I wasn't aware of anything being stolen. Yes, I had locked all the doors and windows I could access. Officers are on their way, she assured me. The storm is causing some road issues, but we have deputies about 12 minutes from your location. Can you stay on the line until they arrive? Yes, I replied, relieved to have someone to talk to, even if only over the phone. Thank you. No problem. Find a secure room if possible, lock the door, and wait for the officers. They'll identify themselves when they arrive. I retreated to my bedroom upstairs, knife still in hand, and locked the door behind me. The dispatcher stayed on the line, periodically checking in while I waited. 12 minutes stretched to 15, then 20. The storm was worse than I had realized, causing flooding on several access roads. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was actually about 25 minutes, headlights swept across my bedroom window as a vehicle pulled into my driveway. "I think they're here," I told the dispatcher. "Stay where you are until they identify themselves," she instructed. Moments later, a powerful flashlight beam cut through the darkness outside, followed by a loud knock on my front door and a clear announcement, "Sheriff's Department." I thanked the dispatcher and ended the call, then made my way downstairs. Through the peephole, I could see 2 uniformed deputies standing on my porch, rain dripping from their hats and jackets. I unlocked the door and let them in. Deputy Mercer was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and alert eyes that missed nothing as he surveyed my living room. His partner, Deputy Collins, was younger and slimmer, with a cautious demeanor. "You reported an intruder?" Mercer asked, his deep voice calm and authoritative. I nodded and explained everything. The tire tracks in the driveway, the footprints by the door, the mud behind the couch, the sounds I'd heard, and finally seeing the back door close as someone left. "Let's take a look around," Mercer said, not dismissing my story as I had feared they might. "Collins, check the perimeter. I'll start inside with you, sir." I showed Mercer the evidence I'd found, including the photos I'd taken on my phone. He examined the back door carefully, noting something I had missed in my panic-subtle tool marks around the lock. "Someone definitely forced this," he confirmed, shining his flashlight on the damaged area. "Recently, too, from the look of it." Relief washed over me. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being paranoid. Collins returned from his exterior check, soaked, but with significant news. "Found fresh footprints leading from the back door into the woods," he reported. "Couldn't follow far in this weather, but someone definitely went that way recently. Also, there's a basement window on the east side that's been broken. Looks like the point of entry." Mercer nodded grimly. "Let's do a thorough sweep of the house. Sir, is there anything valuable or of particular interest that might have been the target? Cash, jewelry, electronics?" I shook my head. "Nothing special. Just normal household stuff. My laptop maybe, but it's still in my work bag." The deputies conducted a methodical search of every room, closet, and potential hiding place in the house, including the attic access I rarely used. They found nothing and no one. But Collins discovered something disturbing in the spare room upstairs. The TV remote from the living room, placed carefully on the floor near the closet. "The remote was downstairs when I was watching TV," I said, a chill running down my spine. "They must have brought it up here while I was searching elsewhere." "Some burglars play games," Mercer explained, his expression grave. "Get a thrill from being in occupied homes, moving things around, watching the residents. Usually they don't confront or harm anyone. The excitement for them is in not getting caught." "But why here?" I asked. "I'm miles from the nearest neighbor. There are easier targets closer to town." Mercer's expression darkened. "That's what concerns me. The isolation makes this place both more difficult to access and more vulnerable. No neighbors to notice strange vehicles or hear calls for help." The implication hung in the air between us, unspoken but clear. I had been specifically targeted. This wasn't a random break-in. "We'll need to file a formal report," Collins said, breaking the tense silence. "And we should check if there have been any similar incidents in the area recently." While Collins radioed in, Mercer helped me check for missing items. Nothing obvious had been taken. My wallet, keys, laptop, and the few pieces of jewelry I owned were all accounted for. The intruder had apparently been content just to be in my space, watching me, moving things around. The thought made my skin crawl. "I don't feel safe staying here tonight," I admitted to Mercer. He nodded understandingly. "That's perfectly reasonable. Do you have somewhere else you can go? Friends or family nearby?" I thought of my friend Elena, who lived about 40 minutes away in town. She'd take me in without question. "Yes, I can arrange something." "Good. Pack what you need for a few days. We'll wait until you're ready to leave, then escort you out." As I gathered essentials in a duffel bag, my mind raced with questions. Who had been in my house? What did they want? Would they come back? The deputy's presence provided temporary security, but they couldn't stay forever. By midnight, I was ready to leave. The storm had lessened somewhat, though rain still fell steadily. Mercer examined the locks on my doors one final time. "We'll have a patrol car drive by regularly for the next few days," he assured me. "And I'd recommend getting a security system installed as soon as possible. Cameras, motion sensors, the works." "I will," I promised. The expense seemed trivial compared to my peace of mind. I followed the deputy's patrol car down my driveway in my truck, glancing constantly in my rearview mirror. The house grew smaller behind me, its darkened windows like vacant eyes watching my departure. As I turned onto the main road, a flash of lightning illuminated the dense woods surrounding my property. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing among the trees at the edge of my driveway, watching. But when the next lightning flash came, there was nothing there. Just shadows and rain and the growing distance between me and my violated home. Elena's spare bedroom became my sanctuary for the next week. Her cozy apartment in town, with its secure building entrance and busy street outside, felt worlds away from my isolated house in the woods. She asked few questions after I explained the basics of what had happened, sensing my need for normalcy and security rather than constant rehashing of the frightening experience. The first night at her place, I barely slept. Every sound, neighbors moving about, traffic on the street below, the building's heating system cycling on and off, startled me awake. When I did manage to drift off, my dreams were filled with shadowy figures standing behind me, watching, waiting. I called in sick to work the next day, spent most of it researching home security systems, and made appointments with 3 different companies for consultations. In the afternoon, I spoke with Deputy Mercer by phone. "We've had units drive by your property several times," he informed me. "No signs of anyone returning. We're checking for similar incidents in neighboring counties and looking into any recently released offenders with histories of breaking and entering or stalking behaviors." "Have you found anything?" I asked. "Nothing concrete yet. There was a similar case about 40 miles north last month. Homeowner reported strange occurrences, items moved around but nothing stolen. Different MO though. That one involved a vacation home that was unoccupied most of the time. The lack of clear answers was frustrating but not surprising. Rural areas like ours were understaffed when it came to law enforcement, and without violence or significant theft, my case wouldn't be high priority." On the 3rd day, I returned to my house, accompanied by Elena and Deputy Collins, who had volunteered to meet us there during his patrol. The daylight and company made the place seem less threatening, though I still felt a persistent unease as we walked through the rooms. Nothing appeared to have been disturbed since I left. The broken basement window had been temporarily secured with plywood by the deputies, and the damaged lock on the back door still needed professional repair. I made notes of everything that needed fixing before I could consider staying here again. The security company I selected installed a comprehensive system the following week. Cameras covering every approach to the house, motion-activated floodlights, door and window sensors, and a monitoring service that would contact both me and the sheriff's department if any alarms were triggered. The technician also identified additional vulnerabilities I hadn't considered and helped address them. "This is a solid setup," he assured me as we tested the system. "Anyone tries anything now, you'll know about it immediately. Plus, just having visible security measures deters most opportunistic intruders." I nodded, though I wasn't convinced my intruder had been opportunistic. The deliberate nature of their actions, entering my home, hiding, watching me, moving objects, suggested something more targeted, more personal. But I kept these thoughts to myself. Gradually, I reclaimed my space. I replaced the damaged locks with heavier, more secure versions. I trimmed back the vegetation around the house to eliminate potential hiding spots. I adopted a large vocal dog from the county shelter, a German Shepherd mix named Ranger, who quickly appointed himself my dedicated protector. 2 weeks after the break-in, I moved back home permanently. The security system, Ranger's presence, and the passage of time had dulled the edge of my fear, though I remained vigilant. I developed new habits, checking the security camera feeds before entering the house, having Ranger do a sweep of the rooms when we arrived home, keeping my phone and a tactical flashlight within reach at all times. The sheriff's department never identified my intruder. The case remained open but inactive, filed away with other unsolved rural crimes. Sometimes I wondered if they had moved on to other targets, or if they had achieved whatever mysterious purpose brought them to my home that rainy night in April. Life gradually returned to a version of normal. Spring progressed into summer. The April rains gave way to June heat. Work kept me busy, and Ranger proved to be excellent company. On the surface, I had recovered from the incident, but some things had changed permanently. I no longer felt completely safe in my own home, even with all the security measures. I'd lost the peaceful solitude that had once been the property's main attraction. Every unexplained sound, every notification from my security system, every dark night when the power flickered during a storm, all triggered the memory of that night and the knowledge that someone had been in my house, watching me without my awareness. Sometimes, driving home in the evening, I would scan the tree line bordering my property, half expecting to glimpse a figure observing from the shadows. Occasionally, walking Ranger in the woods behind the house, I'd feel a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as though unseen eyes were tracking our movements. Was it paranoia? Perhaps. But the tire tracks had been real. The footprints had been real. The mud behind my couch and the relocated remote had been real. Someone had chosen my house, had watched me, had played their unsettling game while I moved obliviously through my evening routine. And the most disturbing question remained unanswered. Why? What had they wanted? Why nothing taken, no confrontation, no clear motive? 6 months after the incident, I received a plain white envelope in my mailbox. No return address, no postmark. It had been hand-delivered. Inside was a single photograph of me, clearly taken through my living room window on what appeared to be a rainy evening. The image quality was poor, blurred by raindrops on the glass, but it was undeniably me, sitting on my couch, looking at my phone, completely unaware of being observed. The photo bore no message, no threat, no demand. Just proof that I had been watched, and might be watched still. I reported it to the sheriff's department immediately. They promised increased patrols and reviewed my security camera footage, which showed nothing unusual in the days preceding the envelope's appearance. The case was officially reopened, but with no new leads, it seemed destined to remain unsolved. That night, as I double-checked the locks and set the security system before bed, Ranger at my side, I couldn't shake the feeling that the incident in April hadn't been the end of something, but the beginning. The photo seemed less like a threat and more like a reminder, or perhaps a promise. They had been here once. They had watched me. They had played their game of moving through my space undetected, and they wanted me to know they could do it again. I stared out the window into the darkness beyond, where the trees swayed in the night breeze, creating moving shadows across my yard. Somewhere out there, perhaps watching even now, was someone who knew the layout of my home, who had studied my routines, who had stood behind my couch while I sat unaware. The security system beeped softly as a confirmation that all zones were armed. Ranger pressed against my leg, alert and protective. I had done everything possible to secure my home, to protect myself. But as I turned away from the window, a fleeting movement in the distant tree line caught my attention. Perhaps just a branch swaying in the wind, perhaps something more. I would never know for certain if I was truly alone. That was their final victory, their lasting legacy. The shadow of doubt, the lingering question, the permanent sensation of being watched. Three days ago, as of writing this, I had an encounter that genuinely chills me to the core. The scariest part was that it happened in my own living quarters. I thought for the longest time that I was safe in my humble college dorm, but now, well, I never feel safe. Even as I write this, I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, trying to see if it will return. However, despite happening 3 days ago, this encounter began roughly a little more than a month prior. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late March. The campus had that peculiar emptiness that comes with mid-semester fatigue. Not quite the ghost town of finals week, but getting there. I had just finished a group math session in the Brenner building, where I helped other students with problems they didn't comprehend, and vice versa. That day, we worked through differential equations until my eyes burned from staring at the whiteboard. Mike and Tasha had been struggling with the material, and as one of Professor Harmon's teaching assistants, I felt obligated to stay until they got it. We concluded at around 3 p.m. As I left the building where the meetings were held, I felt tense, as if something in the near future would cause me trouble. The sky had darkened prematurely, heavy clouds threatening rain. The walk back to my dorm normally took 10 minutes, but that day it felt longer. Every step seemed to require more effort than usual. The bare branches of the oak trees lining the path swayed in the wind, casting strange, elongated shadows across the pavement. I kept glancing behind me, unable to shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching. When I reached Jenkins Hall, my dorm building, the sensation only intensified. The normally bustling lobby was unusually quiet. The elevator ride to the 5th floor was silent, except for the mechanical hum and occasional creak. My floor was eerily silent, too. Most students would be in afternoon classes or at the library. Shortly thereafter, I arrived at my room's door and saw that it was ajar. I remembered checking and double-checking the lock. So either there was an unscheduled and unannounced visit from maintenance, or a member of faculty had decided to check my room. My heart rate accelerated as I pushed the door open wider. Sure enough, I found a college employee, who we'll call Marcus for the sake of anonymity, walking around my room, seemingly searching for something. He wore the standard maintenance uniform, blue shirt with the university logo and khaki pants. But something about his presence felt off. Maybe it was the way he was methodically opening and closing drawers, or how he didn't immediately acknowledge my entrance. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "What are you doing in my room?" Marcus startled slightly, turning to face me. He was tall, lantern-jawed, with deep-set eyes that seemed to take too long to focus on me. He cleared his throat before speaking, and this is the answer he gave, which began this nightmare. "I got a call about 10 minutes ago from your roommate, saying that they heard some weird screaming noises coming from your room. I'm just checking to see if everything's in order. Pretty sure it's just a squeaky pipe, though. Plumbing here is below the ideal standard." His explanation seemed reasonable enough, but something in his tone didn't sit right with me. He maintained eye contact for too long, and his hands never stopped moving, fidgeting with a flashlight he carried. I told him that I understood why he was in my place, and with a promise of sending a plumber to my residence, Marcus exited the room. As he passed me in the doorway, I caught a whiff of something unpleasant, not body odor, but something more chemical, like formaldehyde or ammonia. As soon as the door shut, that same feeling of tenseness overcame me, stronger this time than before. The room felt different somehow, as if Marcus had rearranged things subtly, just enough to make everything feel slightly wrong. The air seemed thicker, harder to breathe. I checked my room even though Marcus had just cleared it, but I wanted to assure myself, because I have a history of seeing things, unexplainable things. Ever since I was a child, I'd occasionally glimpse movements in peripheral vision or hear voices that no one else could. My parents had taken me to doctors and therapists who diagnosed everything from an overactive imagination to mild hallucinations caused by stress. But what happened next couldn't be explained away so easily. I methodically went through my small dorm room. The main area with my desk, bed, and mini fridge seemed normal. Nothing out of place in the small kitchenette area either. My gaze kept returning to the bathroom door, which was slightly ajar, and the closet next to it. I checked the last closet, and as soon as the sliding door shut, the most awful screech bombarded my ears. It sounded like the scraping of metal on metal, like 1,000 fingernails on a chalkboard amplified to unbearable levels. My hands instinctively flew to my ears, but the sound seemed to penetrate through my palms, reverberating inside my skull. As this screeching occurred, a loud thump sounded in the bathroom to my left, and then everything stopped, as if it had never happened. The silence that followed was almost as disorienting as the noise had been. My ears rang in the sudden quiet, and I stood frozen, waiting for the sound to return. My roommate Alex loudly knocked on my door, nearly giving me a heart attack. I opened the door and beheld a very angry neighbor. His usually neatly combed hair was disheveled, and he wore only boxers and a wrinkled t-shirt. "The heck is going on in here? I'm trying to sleep," Alex practically yelled, his voice hoarse with irritation. The dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been awake for too long, probably cramming for midterms like the rest of us. Alex was my roommate on my left, and my dorm was nestled in the corner of the building, so I had no roommate on my right. This gave me some privacy, which I usually appreciated, but in that moment, I wished there were more people around. "I don't know, man. I'm just as clueless as you," I snapped back, equally as frustrated as he was. Then the screeching began again, and over the noise I yelled, "See, it's not me!" The sound was even more intense this time, making the light bulb overhead flicker. Another loud thump ended the screeching, again coming from the bathroom, but then the thumping continued, rhythmic and deliberate, as if they were footsteps. Whatever it was, Alex saw it first, because his eyes got very wide, and he made a weird yelping noise before running back to his room. I turned around, and there was nothing there, but the thumping persisted for 5 more minutes before finally ceasing. I stood in the middle of my room, trembling, as the silence returned. The bathroom door remained partially open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I couldn't bring myself to check it, not yet. Instead, I collapsed onto my bed, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was just the pipes, like Marcus had suggested. Old buildings make strange noises all the time, but in my heart, I knew it was something else. Something had come into my space, and I sensed it wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. The police arrived in my room with reports from Alex saying that I was summoning demons. 2 officers, one young and nervous, the other older with a permanently skeptical expression, stood in my doorway, clearly annoyed at being called for what they assumed was just another college prank. "Your neighbor claims you're performing some kind of ritual in here," the older officer said, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Says he heard screaming and saw something unnatural. I don't know why they even bothered to come to the dorm off of a hungover roommate's call. Perhaps they were concerned about potential drug use or mental health issues, common enough on college campuses. They did a brief and basic search of my room, opening closets and checking under the bed like they were looking for a hiding child rather than anything supernatural." "Nothing here," the younger officer mumbled, looking relieved. "Probably just roommate drama." The older officer gave me a strong warning not to cause trouble. I knew not to argue with the police, so I just nodded and said, "Yes, sir." They left with backward glances, the younger one still scanning the room as if expecting something to jump out. After they left, I sat at my desk, trying to focus on my advanced calculus assignment due the next day. The equations blurred before my eyes as my mind kept returning to what had happened. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Strange acoustics, old plumbing, an overactive imagination fueled by sleep deprivation and caffeine. For some reason, the thumping and screeching stopped for a long time after the police visit. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly, the incident faded to the back of my mind. I threw myself into my studies, spending more time in the library and less in my dorm. Sleep came easier, and the constant feeling of being watched gradually diminished. Spring break came and went. I stayed on campus, one of the few students who couldn't afford to go home or on vacation. The empty dorm building should have been eerie, but I found it peaceful. The silence was comforting rather than threatening. When classes resumed and students returned, bringing with them their noise and energy, I felt almost normal again. Alex and I had reached an unspoken agreement not to discuss what had happened. He'd nod briefly when we passed in the hallway, but otherwise kept his distance. It wasn't until 5 days ago that things started again. I was sitting at my desk, working on a problem set for Professor Harmon's class. Outside, rain lashed against the window, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Campus power had been flickering all evening, so I'd lit a few candles as backup. The first indication that something was wrong was the temperature drop. One moment, my room was comfortably warm. The next, I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. The candle flames bent sideways, as if in a draft, though all windows were closed. Then came the screeching, louder than before, more insistent. It started as a distant sound, like metal grinding against metal, but rapidly increased in volume until it seemed to be coming from inside my own head. I dropped my pencil and pressed my palms against my ears, but it did nothing to muffle the noise. The thumping followed, fiercer and louder, and lasting longer than before. Each impact seemed to shake the room, though nothing visibly moved. The sound pattern was different this time, not random but deliberate, almost like Morse code or some other form of communication. It all came to a head 3 days ago, as I said in the beginning. This was the day that I saw it. I had returned to my dorm from yet another group math session, dreading the impending bedlam that the noises in my room promised to cause. The day had started normally enough. I'd attended my morning classes, had lunch with some classmates from my statistics seminar, and then headed to the math center for the group session. Throughout the day, though, I'd felt increasingly uneasy. Colors seemed too bright, sounds too sharp. People's voices had an echo to them, as if I was hearing them from the bottom of a well. When I returned to my dorm, I found the door locked as I'd left it. This small normalcy gave me a moment's relief. Inside, everything appeared undisturbed. Books stacked neatly on my desk, bed made with military precision, a habit from my strict upbringing, dirty laundry piled in the corner. I sat at my desk and tried to focus on homework, but the words and numbers on the page kept shifting, refusing to stay still. The thumping started almost immediately, soft at first, but growing steadily louder. It seemed to come from the bathroom initially, then moved, as if whatever was making the noise was walking. The thumping this time, though, kept on going, getting closer to me as I studied. The noises seemed to exit the bathroom, make their way across the room, and over to an area right behind me. I kept typing, fingers trembling on the keyboard, pretending not to notice. Perhaps if I ignored it, it would go away. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged in front of my face, and my fingers grew numb with cold. Still, I kept working, desperately clinging to normalcy, even as every instinct screamed at me to run. I was just trying to ignore it, until something touched my shoulder. The contact was light but unmistakable, cold, slightly damp, with a pressure that felt like fingers. I leapt up, knocking over my chair, ready to pound whoever broke into my room. But I saw nothing. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break my ribs. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold. I scanned the room frantically, seeing nothing out of place. No intruder, no explanation for what had touched me. However, as I continued to scan my room, my gaze was drawn to the darkest corner, where my closet met the exterior wall. At first, it looked like a shadow, denser than it should be. But as I stared, the darkness seemed to congeal, taking form. God, it was terrible. The creature was just so wrong. I remember its features all too well. Red pupils encased in inky black eyes on a face with a massive smile. It didn't move at first, just stood watching me from the corner, partially obscured by shadow. I couldn't look away. The thing was almost humanoid in shape, but its skin was an unnatural gray, and its arms ended in hands with massive claws. It was cloaked in a thick black billowing robe that seemed to move even though there was no breeze in the room. The fabric didn't look quite solid, more like smoke that had been shaped into cloth. Its smile. My God, this thing's smile was so wide, and there were so many yellow teeth, each one pointed like a predator's. The smile didn't reach its eyes, which remained cold and calculating. It just looked at me, head tilted slightly as if curious about my reaction. It then began to slowly approach me, moving with a strange, fluid grace that no human could mimic. Its feet, if it had any, were hidden beneath the robe, giving the impression that it was floating rather than walking. And that's when I realized I couldn't move. I know this sounds like a horror movie cliché, but I couldn't even talk, let alone scream for help. My body felt leaden, muscles locked in place. Only my eyes could move, following the creature's approach with mounting terror. I then remembered a cryptid that I recently read about in Freaky Folklore called El Cucuy. Professor Ramirez had assigned the book for my folklore and mythology elective class, and I'd read it cover to cover, fascinated by the strange beings described within. As I imagined the art depicting this creature, it looked like a perfect match. The book had described El Cucuy as a bogeyman figure in Hispanic folklore, a monster that parents would invoke to scare children into behaving. "Be good or El Cucuy will get you," they would say. Just as this demonic entity began to reach out to grab me, sealing my fate, my roommate opened my door, which I luckily had left open. The fluorescent light from the hallway flooded in, cutting through the darkness. Alex stood there holding a stack of mail. "Hey, I think some of your stuff got mixed in with—" He stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening as he took in the scene before him. He screamed like a little girl, and then ran away from the entrance to my room, the mail scattering across the floor. I guess Alex's scream was loud enough to startle this thing into not killing me. It gave me a look that seemed to say, "We'll continue this at a later time," before disappearing. It's like it was there, and then it just wasn't, like the laws of physics didn't apply to this thing. One moment, it stood before me, arm outstretched. The next, it was simply gone, leaving no trace of its presence save for the lingering cold in the room. The paralysis that had gripped me released its hold, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. My limbs felt weak, pins and needles prickling through them as circulation returned. I crawled to the door, too afraid to stand, and pulled myself into the hallway. I then went to Alex's room, finding him cowering in a corner with a kitchen knife. His hands shook so badly that I feared he might hurt himself more than any intruder. His face was pale, eyes wide with terror, and he flinched when I knocked on his already open door. "It's just me," I said, raising my hands to show I meant no harm. "It's gone now." After he saw that I was fine, and assuring him that I definitely was not a body snatcher in disguise, he asked if I wanted some help from an exorcist or a medicine man, as he knew a few. His grandmother, he explained between nervous glances at the door, practiced traditional healing methods and knew people who dealt with spiritual disturbances. I told him to find whoever had the ability to ward off El Cucuy. At that point, I was willing to try anything. With shaking hands, I powered up my laptop and began researching El Cucuy more thoroughly. The university's library database yielded scholarly articles on folklore and mythology, while less academic sources like paranormal forums and supernatural websites provided first-hand accounts. After this encounter, I looked into El Cucuy, and my encounter became more and more similar to other encounters people have had with it. The stories varied in details, but certain elements remained consistent: the red eyes, the unsettling grin, the ability to appear and disappear at will. According to multiple sources, El Cucuy was said to target misbehaving children, hiding under beds or in closets, waiting for them to fall asleep before dragging them away. Some accounts claimed it would eat them. Others suggested it took them to a hellish dimension as punishment. Never look up pictures of El Cucuy if you want to sleep at night. The artistic renderings alone were enough to make my skin crawl, but none of them captured the true horror of seeing it in person. The artists always got something wrong. The eyes not quite right, the smile not wide enough, the presence not sufficiently menacing. The only thing that confuses me is that this cryptid's home continent is Europe, and I live in America. Traditional accounts placed El Cucuy in Spain and Portugal, with the legend later spreading to Latin American countries through colonization. I guess it goes where it pleases, not bound by geographical boundaries like mortal creatures. What troubled me most were the accounts of what happened to those who encountered El Cucuy and lived. Many reported ongoing harassment. Objects moving by themselves, strange noises at night, horrifying nightmares, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Some claim to have been marked by the creature, doomed to see it again and again until it finally took them. I found forum posts from people claiming to have banished El Cucuy through various means: religious rituals, protective symbols, specific herbs burned as incense. The methodologies varied wildly, from Catholic exorcism rites to indigenous cleansing ceremonies, suggesting that different cultural approaches might work against this entity. As I delved deeper into my research, I began to notice strange things happening around me. My laptop would glitch, displaying momentary distortions before returning to normal. The temperature in the room fluctuated dramatically. Once I could have sworn I saw my own reflection in the screen blink independently of me. I printed out protection symbols from various traditions, crosses, pentagrams, eyes of Horus, hand of Fatima, and taped them around my room. I placed salt lines along the windowsill and doorway, remembering from my research that many cultures believed salt repelled evil spirits. Alex returned that evening with news. His grandmother had contacted a woman named Elena, who specialized in cleansing spaces of negative energies and entities. She could come in 2 days, which meant I would have to survive at least one more night, with the knowledge that El Cucuy might return. I couldn't face staying in my room alone, so Alex reluctantly agreed to let me crash on his floor. We pushed his desk against the door and kept all lights on. Neither of us slept much that night, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. Morning came without incident, but the day passed in a haze of exhaustion and dread. I attended classes mechanically, unable to focus on lectures or conversations. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking presence. Every stranger's smile reminded me of those yellow teeth. The second night was worse. Around 3 a.m. we both woke to the sound of scratching at Alex's door. Light but persistent, like claws dragging slowly across the wood. We sat frozen, barely breathing, as the scratching continued for what felt like hours before finally stopping. When dawn broke, I examined the door. 4 thin lines marred the wood, too high to have been made by any animal. Alex saw them too, his face draining of color. "One more night," he whispered. "Just one more night. And then Elena will fix this." I wasn't so sure. This thing, El Cucuy or whatever it really was, seemed powerful, ancient. Could any human ritual truly banish it? But I nodded anyway, clinging to hope because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. That night we decided to stay in the 24-hour campus library, surrounded by other students and bright fluorescent lighting. We found a quiet corner with comfortable chairs and took turns napping while the other kept watch. It wasn't a sustainable solution, but it got us through the night. Elena was scheduled to arrive at 4 p.m. the next day. As we returned to the dorm to meet her, I felt a growing sense of dread. What if the cleansing didn't work? What if it made El Cucuy angry? What if Elena took one look at whatever was haunting me and refused to help? Anyway, as I'm writing this, Elena and her assistant Juniper are blessing my dorm and burning sage in it. The smoke curls through the air, carrying with it a distinct earthy scent that somehow makes breathing easier. Elena moves methodically through the space, murmuring prayers in a language I don't recognize, while Juniper follows with more herbs and ceremonial objects. I pray to whatever powers above that I never ever have to see the smile of El Cucuy again. But deep down, I know this isn't over. The look it gave me before disappearing wasn't one of defeat, it was a promise. The cleansing ritual seemed to work, at least initially. Elena had been thorough, blessing every corner of the room, placing protective amulets in strategic locations, and teaching me a prayer to recite if I felt threatened. The air felt lighter afterward, and for the first time in days I slept without nightmares. 3 days passed, without incident, no screeching, no thumping, no shadowy figures in corners. I began to relax, tentatively believing that Elena's ritual had succeeded in banishing El Cucuy. Alex stopped checking on me every few hours, and we both settled back into our normal routines. I forgot to mention that I was a very unruly kid growing up, so that may have influenced the encounter, as El Cucuy is attracted to children or young people who misbehave. My parents had struggled to control my rebellious tendencies. I'd sneak out at night, skip school, experiment with substances I shouldn't have. They'd tried everything from therapy to military-style boot camps, but nothing seemed to curb my defiance. College had been a fresh start. Away from my hometown and the reputation I'd built there, I'd made an effort to reform. My grades were good, I avoided the party scene, and I'd found productive outlets for my energy through tutoring and campus clubs. But perhaps El Cucuy didn't care about reformation. Perhaps it saw the stain on my soul from years of misbehavior and decided I was still deserving of punishment. On the 4th night after the cleansing, I woke to the sound of my name being whispered directly into my ear. The voice wasn't human. It was raspy, with a strange echo quality, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison. I sat up, heart pounding, and scanned the darkened room. Nothing seemed out of place, but the protective amulet Elena had hung above my bed was missing. The salt lines along the windowsill had been disturbed, grains scattered across the floor in what looked like deliberate patterns. I reached for my phone to call Alex, but as my fingers touched the screen, it glitched, displaying a series of symbols I didn't recognize before going black. The temperature in the room dropped rapidly, my breath fogging in the air. Then came the smell, something rotting, mixed with a chemical odor similar to what I'd noticed on Marcus the maintenance man. The realization hit me then. Marcus had never been a maintenance worker. The university had no record of him when I'd asked at the administrative office. Whatever had been in my room that day had been wearing a human disguise, perhaps preparing the space for El Cucuy's arrival. Movement caught my eye, a shadow detaching itself from the wall, growing denser and more defined. I scrambled out of bed, backing toward the door, but found it locked from the outside somehow. The shadow continued to take form, resolving into the now familiar shape of El Cucuy. It looked more substantial this time, more present. The red eyes gleamed with malicious intelligence, and the smile seemed wider, hungrier. The claws clicked together as it flexed its long fingers, the sound like knives being sharpened. "You cannot escape me," it said, its voice the same raspy whisper I'd heard earlier. "I have marked you as mine." I fumbled in my pocket for the small vial of blessed water Elena had given me, but it was gone. All of her protections had been systematically removed or nullified, leaving me defenseless. El Cucuy seemed amused by my panic, tilting its head as it watched me search for a weapon, an escape route, anything that might save me. It was toying with me, enjoying my fear. "Why me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. "Why now?" The creature's smile widened impossibly further. "You invited me in long ago, child of disobedience. Your soul called to me through the darkness of your actions." It took a step closer, and I pressed myself against the wall, wishing I could pass through it. "I've changed," I insisted. "I'm not that person anymore." El Cucuy laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "The stain remains, once marked, always marked. You belong to me now." As it reached for me, I remembered something Elena had said during the cleansing. That creatures like El Cucuy fed on fear grew stronger from it. That they could only take what was freely given, whether through invitation or surrender to terror. With nothing left to lose, I forced myself to stand straight and look directly into those horrifying red eyes. "I don't believe in you," I said, the words feeling strangely powerful on my tongue. "You have no power over me that I don't grant you." El Cucuy hesitated, its smile faltering slightly. I continued, gaining confidence. "I reject you. I deny your claim on me. I am not yours to take." The creature hissed, its form becoming less distinct around the edges. "You cannot deny what you have seen with your own eyes, what you have heard with your own ears." "I can," I insisted, "and I do. You are nothing but a manifestation of my own guilt and fear. You exist because I allowed it. And now I'm taking back that permission." El Cucuy shrieked, the sound painful to my ears, but I stood my ground. Its form wavered, becoming more transparent. The red eyes dimmed, and the smile contorted into a grimace. "You will see me again," it promised, its voice fading. "When your conviction wavers, when doubt returns, I will be waiting in the shadows." Then it was gone, leaving behind only a lingering chill and the faint smell of decay. I sank to the floor, trembling with exhaustion and residual fear, but also with a strange sense of triumph. I had faced El Cucuy and survived, not through external protections or rituals, but through my own inner strength. The door unlocked itself with a click, and Alex burst in, wielding a baseball bat. He had heard the shriek and come running, expecting to find me in danger. Instead, he found me sitting on the floor, smiling weakly. "It's gone," I told him, "for now at least." He looked skeptical but lowered the bat. "You sure?" "What happened?" I explained as best I could, though the experience seemed to lose something in translation to ordinary language. How could I describe the feeling of looking into those eyes, of finding the courage to deny a creature that by all rights shouldn't exist? Alex listened without interrupting, then sat beside me on the floor. So, what now? You think it's really gone for good? I shook my head. No. It said it would return if my conviction wavered. I think it's a battle I'll have to fight more than once. Then you shouldn't fight it alone, he said firmly. Next time we'll be ready, both of us. His solidarity touched me deeply. Until then, I'd seen Alex as little more than a convenient neighbor, someone to nod to in the hallway. Now, he was an ally in something larger and more significant than our academic lives. We spent the rest of the night researching more protective measures, ordering additional supplies online for expedited delivery, and planning how to fortify both our rooms against future incursions. As dawn broke, I felt more prepared and less afraid than I had in weeks. Elena returned the next day, concerned that her cleansing hadn't worked. When I explained what had happened, she nodded thoughtfully. The most powerful protection is always from within, she said. External wards and blessings can help, but ultimately, these entities can only be truly banished by the strength of your own spirit. She helped us set up new protective measures, stronger this time, combining elements from multiple traditions for maximum efficacy. Salt lines were reinforced with iron filings. Amulets were charged under the full moon. Prayers from various faiths were written on small scrolls and hidden throughout the room. Remember, Elena said before leaving, fear is their food. Deny them that, and they starve. It's been 2 weeks since my confrontation with El Cucuy, and I'm still sleeping with the lights on. The protective measures Elena helped us set up remain in place, refreshed regularly according to her instructions. Alex and I have developed a system, checking in with each other several times a day, never staying in our rooms alone for too long, keeping a shared journal of anything unusual we notice. The university semester continues around us, oblivious to the supernatural battle fought in a corner dorm room. I attend classes, complete assignments, participate in study groups. On the surface, everything is normal. But beneath that facade, I'm constantly vigilant, watching for signs of El Cucuy's return. There have been moments, brief but terrifying, when I think I glimpse movement in dark corners, or hear the faintest echo of that metal-on-metal screech. Each time, I force myself to stand tall, to reject the fear that rises in my throat, to recite the mantra Elena taught me, I see you, I know you, I deny you power over me. Alex has been unexpectedly supportive through all of this. He's read every book on folklore and supernatural entities that the university library carries, building a database of information that might help us understand what we're dealing with. His grandmother sends regular packages of protective herbs and charms, which we distribute strategically around our rooms. We've also discreetly reached out to other students who might have experienced similar phenomena. Campus folklore is rich with ghost stories and unexplained happenings. Most are probably exaggerated or entirely fabricated, but some contain elements that resonate with our experience. We're careful not to reveal too much, framing our questions as research for a creative writing project, but we've managed to collect several accounts that seem credible. One particularly interesting story came from a graduate student in the anthropology department. 3 years ago, she had been working late in the university's archives when she encountered what she described as a shadow person with red eyes. It had followed her for weeks afterward, appearing in reflective surfaces and dark corners, always watching but never approaching. Eventually, she had consulted with a professor who specialized in comparative mythology, and together they had performed a ritual that seemed to banish the entity. When we asked what ritual they had used, she couldn't or wouldn't tell us the details, only that it involved acknowledging the truth of your own darkness. The phrase has haunted me since, making me wonder if there's something more I need to confront within myself to truly be free of El Cucuy. Elena visits weekly, checking her protections and teaching us more about spiritual defense. During her last visit, she brought a small, leather-bound book filled with handwritten accounts of encounters with entities similar to El Cucuy from various cultures around the world. The Boogeyman, El Coco, Der Schwarze Mann, Babao, different names for what might be the same creature, or perhaps a class of creatures that feed on human fear. They are opportunists, Elena explained, turning pages filled with carefully documented encounters. They find cracks in our spiritual armor, guilt, shame, unresolved trauma, and exploit them to gain entry into our lives. So it's not just about childhood misbehavior? I asked, thinking of my troubled youth. Elena shook her head. That's the simplified version parents tell children to scare them into obedience. The truth is more complex. These entities are attracted to spiritual vulnerability, to internal conflicts that weaken our natural defenses against them. This made a certain sense to me. Despite my outward reformation in college, I still carried guilt for my past actions, still sometimes felt like an imposter among my more straight-laced peers. Perhaps El Cucuy had sensed that inner conflict and identified me as an easy target. How do I resolve those conflicts? I asked. Elena smiled gently. That's the work of a lifetime, my dear. But acknowledging them is the first step. Bringing them into the light diminishes their power as hiding places for entities like El Cucuy. I've been journaling since then, trying to excavate and examine the parts of myself I've kept hidden, not just from others, but from my own conscious awareness. It's painful work, confronting the person I used to be, the hurt I caused, the potential I wasted. But with each honest acknowledgement, I feel somehow lighter, more integrated, less divided against myself. Alex has been doing similar work, though he's more private about it. I sometimes hear him on the phone with his grandmother speaking softly in a language I don't understand, presumably discussing his own spiritual journey. We don't talk much about these personal explorations, but there's a growing sense of solidarity between us, a shared understanding that transcends words. Last night, I dreamed of El Cucuy for the first time since our confrontation. In the dream, it stood at the foot of my bed, watching me with those red eyes. But it seemed diminished somehow, less substantial. When it spoke, its voice was fainter, more distant. I am still here, it said, still waiting. In the dream, I sat up and met its gaze without fear. I know you are, I replied, and I am still denying you entry. We stayed like that, locked in a silent standoff until I woke to early morning sunlight streaming through my window. The dream left me not with terror, but with a strange sense of empowerment. El Cucuy was still there, still watching from whatever dimension it inhabited, but it could not reach me unless I allowed it to. I know the battle isn't over. Maybe it never will be entirely. Perhaps El Cucuy represents a part of the human experience that can't be completely banished, the shadow self, the capacity for darkness that exists within all of us. But I'm learning that acknowledging that darkness doesn't mean surrendering to it. Quite the opposite. It means integrating it, understanding it, and ultimately choosing a different path. Yesterday, I returned to the library and picked up Freaky Folklore again, this time reading it not with morbid fascination, but with a more discerning eye. The book's description of El Cucuy ends with a passage I hadn't really noticed before. In some versions of the legend, El Cucuy eventually becomes not a punisher, but a reluctant teacher, forcing the one it haunts to confront their hidden selves and emerge stronger. The terror it brings can, paradoxically, lead to profound personal transformation. I don't know if I'm ready to be grateful for this experience. The fear was too real, the danger too immediate for that kind of perspective yet. But I can acknowledge that it has changed me, pushed me toward a more honest reckoning with myself than I might otherwise have undertaken. As I write these final words, sitting at my desk with protective charms hanging from my lamp and salt lines intact along my windowsill, I feel not safe exactly, but prepared. El Cucuy may return. Other entities may find their way to my door. The darkness has many faces and many names, but I'm learning to stand in that darkness without being consumed by it, to look into red eyes and yellow-toothed smiles without flinching. I am learning that the most terrifying monsters are often reflections of our own unacknowledged fears and failings, given form and substance by our reluctance to face them. So if you ever find yourself facing El Cucuy or something like it, if you ever hear that metal screech or feel those cold fingers on your shoulder, remember this: it feeds on your fear. It grows stronger when you run. The only way out is through. Through honest confrontation with whatever darkness within you has given it permission to enter. Stand your ground. Speak your truth. Deny it power over you. Then, and then alone, is when the real fear sets in for the monster. The fear that it has lost its hold on you forever. Update. I'm still on high alert, checking corners, never going out alone at night. I continue practicing the protection rituals Elena taught me, not out of mindless superstition, but as a tangible reminder of my own agency. Alex and I maintain our pact of watchfulness, looking out for each other in ways that exceed mere roommate courtesy. The protective herbs are refreshed weekly, the salt lines meticulously maintained. I forgot to mention that I was a very unruly kid growing up, so that may have influenced the encounter, as El Cucuy is attracted to children or young people who misbehave. But maybe that's also why I found the strength to face it. Years of defying authority figures prepared me, in some twisted way, to defy a supernatural entity as well. Perhaps our weaknesses and our strengths are not separate qualities, but different expressions of the same core traits. I don't know if my story will help anyone else who might face similar encounters. Each manifestation seems unique to the individual, tailored to their specific fears and vulnerabilities. But if you find yourself standing face to face with something that shouldn't exist, something with red eyes and too many teeth, remember this: you are not powerless. Fear is a choice, and sometimes the monster is only as real as you allow it to be. Then, and then alone, is when the real fear sets in. I've always been comfortable with solitude. After my divorce 3 years ago, I embraced living alone in this modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. The neighborhood isn't fancy, just a quiet street where most people keep to themselves. My routine was simple: work from home as a freelance graphic designer, evening walks, occasional video calls with friends, and weekends filled with gardening or reading. It started so subtly, I almost convinced myself it wasn't happening. 3 weeks ago, I returned from grocery shopping to find my coffee mug on the kitchen counter instead of in the sink where I'd left it that morning. I dismissed it. Stress and lack of sleep had been making me forgetful lately. But the following day, I noticed my laptop had been moved slightly on my desk. Not dramatically, just rotated about 20 degrees from where I always positioned it. "You're being paranoid," I told myself, trying to laugh it off while double-checking all my doors and windows before bed. That night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to a faint scratching sound. I lay perfectly still, listening as it continued intermittently from somewhere inside the walls. Probably mice, I reasoned, making a mental note to call pest control. But as I drifted back to sleep, a different noise froze me. The distinct sound of weight shifting on the floorboards in the hallway outside my bedroom. I held my breath, ears straining in the darkness. Nothing followed. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just the house settling. The next day, I installed a simple security system. Nothing fancy, just motion sensors for the doors and windows. The first night it triggered at 2:43 a.m. Heart pounding, I checked the app to see which sensor had been activated. The back door. I called the police from my locked bedroom. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the soft earth outside, nothing missing. The officer suggested it might have been a false alarm, perhaps triggered by a draft or temperature change. I nodded politely but requested extra patrols through the neighborhood for a few nights. After they left, I obsessively checked every corner of the house. Nothing seemed disturbed, yet something felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling of intrusion, that imperceptible shift in the atmosphere that occurs when someone else has occupied your space. I installed more sophisticated security cameras the following day. 3 inside, 4 outside, motion activated with night vision. The technician assured me they were top of the line. I slept better that night, comforted by the blinking red lights of my new guardians. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, I saw nothing unusual, just empty rooms and still hallways. Yet when I entered my home office, I found my journal open on the desk. I always kept it closed in the top drawer. I frantically checked the camera footage again. The office camera showed nothing, just an empty room all night. But when I entered at 8:36 a.m., the journal was clearly visible on the desk, open to an entry from 2 months ago. I called the security company to ask if there was any way the footage could have been tampered with. They assured me it was impossible without physical access to my system. The technician's voice held a note of concern as he asked if I'd been sleeping well, suggesting stress can sometimes cause memory lapses. That evening, I discovered small items had been rearranged throughout the house. My toothbrush was on the wrong side of the sink. Books on my shelf had been reordered. A framed photo of my parents was turned slightly toward the wall. I sat in my living room, trembling, as night fell. The cameras showed nothing but empty rooms, no intruders, no explanation. I was beginning to question my own sanity when my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "I like watching you sleep." I nearly dropped the phone. With shaking hands, I called the police again. They took the report seriously this time, asking for the phone number and promising to trace it. They suggested I stay elsewhere for a few days while they investigated. I declined. This was my home. I wouldn't be driven out by fear. As I double-checked the locks that night, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small piece of blue thread caught in the deadbolt of my front door. The same color as the sweater I'd worn yesterday. The sweater I'd hung in my bedroom closet. Someone had been inside while I was out, and the cameras had seen nothing. Detective Rivera arrived the next morning to follow up on my report. Middle-aged, with tired eyes, she walked methodically through my house, examining doors and windows while asking questions. "And you're certain no one else has keys?" she asked, kneeling to inspect the back door lock. "Positive. I changed all the locks after the divorce." She nodded, making notes. "These text messages, they came from a burner phone, untraceable." She hesitated before continuing. "Miss Johnson from next door says she hasn't noticed anyone suspicious around your property." I caught the slight skepticism in her tone. "You think I'm imagining things?" "I didn't say that," she replied carefully. "But sometimes when people live alone, especially after trauma like divorce, the mind can play tricks. Heightened anxiety can—" "I'm not having a breakdown," I interrupted. "Someone has been in my house, moving things, watching me." She didn't argue, but asked to see my security footage. We reviewed it together on my laptop. Hours of nothing, empty rooms, still hallways. The detective looked troubled. "Have you considered a carbon monoxide detector?" she asked suddenly. "What?" "Carbon monoxide poisoning can cause paranoia, memory problems. It's odorless, colorless. Just a precaution." I stared at her, incredulous. "This isn't carbon monoxide. Someone texted me, Detective." She nodded. "We'll keep investigating the text. In the meantime, I'd like you to speak with someone." She handed me a card for a Dr. Elizabeth Chen, psychologist. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table, fuming. They thought I was delusional, but I knew what I'd experienced was real. That night, I set up my own test. Before bed, I placed items in specific positions throughout the house. A pen precisely aligned with the edge of the coffee table, a mug handle turned exactly north, books arranged in a particular pattern. I took photos of each setup with my phone. I slept fitfully, waking repeatedly to check the security app. Nothing triggered the cameras, no movement detected. In the morning, I went through the house with my photos comparing. The pen had moved 2 inches. The mug handle now pointed east. 3 books had swapped positions. My hands trembled as I checked the security footage again. Nothing. No one had entered these rooms during the night. Yet things had moved. I called the security company again, demanding to know if there could be blind spots or if someone could disable the cameras temporarily. The technician grew annoyed, insisting their system was foolproof. He suggested, not unkindly, that perhaps I should consider the detective's advice about speaking with a professional. I hung up and sat on my couch, mind racing. If the cameras didn't capture anything, there were only 2 possibilities. Either I was moving things unconsciously, perhaps sleepwalking, or the alternative was too disturbing to contemplate. Someone was inside my house, somehow avoiding detection, watching me, toying with me. That evening, another text arrived. "You look pretty in blue. Wear it more often." I was wearing a blue blouse. I hadn't left the house all day. I ran to the bathroom, retching with fear. Someone was watching me right now. I grabbed a kitchen knife and searched every room, every closet, under every bed. Nothing. Desperate, I called my friend Megan and asked her to come over. She arrived 30 minutes later, concern etched on her face. "You look terrible," she said, hugging me. "What's going on?" I told her everything. The moved items, the texts, the useless security system, the disbelieving detective. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly worried. "You can stay with me tonight," she offered. "We'll figure this out tomorrow." "No," I said firmly. "If I leave, I might never come back. This is my home." She insisted on staying over. We checked every room together, then settled in the living room with wine and a movie, trying to create normalcy. I felt safer with another person present. The crushing weight of fear temporarily lifted. Later, as Megan slept on the couch, I lay awake in my bedroom, listening to the house's subtle noises, the refrigerator humming, the heating system clicking on, the faint creak of... I froze. That wasn't a normal house sound. Someone was moving in the attic above me. I slipped out of bed, knife clutched in my hand, and crept down the hallway to wake Megan. The living room was dark. I could make out her form under the blanket on the couch. "Megan," I whispered, approaching. "Wake up. I heard something." The blanket shifted, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, horror washed over me. The blanket covered only pillows arranged to look like a sleeping person. Megan was gone. My phone lit up with a text. "Your friend left hours ago. We've been alone all night." I ran to the front door, knife still clutched in my trembling hand. It was locked from the inside, deadbolt secured. I checked the back door, also locked. All windows remained sealed. I called Megan immediately, panic rising in my throat. "Hello?" Her voice was groggy with sleep. "Megan, where are you?" "At home, in bed." She paused. "What's wrong?" "You were just here, staying over." Silence stretched across the line. "What are you talking about? I haven't seen you in weeks." My legs gave out and I sank to the kitchen floor. "But you came over tonight. We watched a movie. You were sleeping on my couch." "That's not possible," she said gently. "I've been home all evening. We haven't made plans to meet up." "Someone was here," I whispered. "Someone pretending to be you." "Listen to me." Her voice grew firm. "I'm coming over right now. Don't do anything. Just wait for me." While waiting for Megan, the real Megan, I frantically reviewed my security footage. The cameras showed nothing unusual. No Megan arriving, no movie watching, just me alone, moving through the house, sometimes talking to thin air, setting up 2 wine glasses, laughing at the TV. I stared at the footage in disbelief. Had I hallucinated the entire evening? When Megan arrived, I showed her the footage, hands shaking. "I swear you were here. We watched The Departed. You had red wine? You wore a green sweater?" Megan looked at me with such concern that I fell silent. "When did you last sleep properly?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Days ago, maybe longer." She guided me to the bedroom. "You need rest. I'll stay here, for real this time." Exhaustion overwhelmed me, and I surrendered to sleep while Megan kept watch. Morning light streamed through the curtains when I woke. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then the memories flooded back. I found Megan in the kitchen making coffee. "How are you feeling?" she asked cautiously. "Better," I lied. "Did you see anything unusual last night?" She shook her head. "Nothing. House was quiet." She hesitated. "I think you should see someone. Maybe that doctor the detective recommended." "You think I'm having a breakdown?" "I think you're experiencing something traumatic," she corrected. "Whether it's coming from outside or inside." I agreed to call Dr. Chen, to placate Megan, if nothing else. After she left, I sat at my computer, determined to make sense of what was happening. If someone was entering my house undetected, they had to be using a method I hadn't considered. I researched home security vulnerabilities obsessively. Hidden passages? My house was too new. Neighbors with access? None had keys. Former residents? The previous owners had moved overseas. Then I stumbled across an article about wireless security camera vulnerabilities. Some systems could be hacked remotely, allowing intruders to loop footage, creating the illusion of empty rooms while they moved freely through the house. My heart raced. This explained everything. The moved objects, the security system showing nothing. Someone was hacking my cameras. I immediately unplugged the entire system and called a different security company. They sent a technician who confirmed my fears. My cameras had been compromised. The system showed evidence of remote access from an unknown IP address. How would someone do this? I asked. They'd need decent technical skills, he explained, and they'd have needed initial access to your network. He paused. Do you use public Wi-Fi? Or have you had any repair people in recently? My blood ran cold. The cable company. They sent someone to fix my internet connection 3 weeks ago. The timing aligned perfectly with when the strange occurrences began. The technician installed a new, more secure system with encrypted connections and showed me how to check for tampering. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone had been watching me, entering my home while the cameras showed looped footage of empty rooms. That night, I received another text. New cameras won't help. I'm already inside. I called Detective Rivera immediately and shared my discovery about the hacked cameras. She took it seriously this time, promising to obtain records from the cable company about the technician who had visited my home. I slept with a chair propped under my bedroom doorknob, a baseball bat beside my bed. In the morning, Detective Rivera called with disturbing news. The cable company has no record of sending anyone to your address on that date, she said. Whoever came to your house was impersonating their staff. What about the texts? I asked. Can you trace them now? We're working on it, she assured me. In the meantime, I'm sending an officer to stay outside your house tonight. As dusk fell, I spotted the police cruiser parked across the street. Its presence provided little comfort. If someone had been entering my home undetected for weeks, what would stop them now? I checked my new security system obsessively. Nothing unusual appeared on the footage. No mysterious movements, no signs of tampering. At midnight, my phone chimed with another text. Look in your basement storage room, behind the old paint cans. My hand trembled as I called Detective Rivera. She instructed me to wait for the officer outside to accompany me. Together, we descended into the basement, flashlights illuminating the dark corners. In the storage room, behind a row of paint cans, we discovered something that made my blood freeze. A small camp bed, snack wrappers, a water bottle, and dozens of photographs of me, sleeping, showering, working, eating. Some dated back months before the strange occurrences began. Someone had been living in my basement, watching me, for months. You need to pack a bag, Detective Rivera insisted as more officers arrived, transforming my home into a crime scene. You can't stay here tonight. I moved through my bedroom mechanically, stuffing clothes into an overnight bag. Yellow evidence markers dotted my house like a surreal art installation. Forensic technicians dusted for fingerprints on doorknobs, light switches, and the basement camp bed. We found something else, Rivera said from the doorway, her expression grim. Holes drilled in your ceiling and walls, carefully placed behind vents or light fixtures. Cameras or peepholes, we think. I collapsed onto the edge of my bed, nausea rising. He was watching me everywhere, in every room. We'll find him, she promised. The evidence suggests he's been gone for at least 24 hours. Probably spooked when you discovered the camera tampering. I stayed with Megan that night, jumping at every sound, checking my phone compulsively. No new texts came. The next morning, Rivera called with an update. We found fingerprints. They match a man named Edward Mercer. He has priors for stalking and breaking and entering. Do I know him? I asked, searching my memory. Not directly. He worked for a food delivery service you've used. We think that's how he initially accessed your house. Delivered food, scoped out the place, perhaps kept a spare key you had hidden. It made horrible sense. I had kept a key under a flower pot for months before the divorce, only removing it recently when the strange occurrences began. He must have taken it long before then. Have you caught him? Not yet. His last known address is abandoned, but we've got his photo circulating. It's just a matter of time. They showed me his mugshot, an unremarkable man with hollow eyes and thinning hair. I had no recollection of ever seeing him, yet he had watched me for months, invaded every private moment of my life. Forensic examination of my computer revealed spyware that had given him access to my emails, calendar, even the microphone and camera. He knew my schedule, my conversations, my plans. The violation was complete. Days passed. I stayed with Megan, afraid to return home despite the police assurances that it was now secure. Rivera suggested I consider moving, starting fresh elsewhere. The thought was simultaneously appealing and infuriating. Why should I be driven from my home? A week after the discovery in my basement, Rivera called with news. We found Mercer's vehicle abandoned near the state line. Blood in the driver's seat, a lot of it. Is he? We don't know yet. No body. Could be self-inflicted, could be something else. 3 more days passed without developments. Slowly, I gathered the courage to return home. Police had installed additional security measures. A patrol car would drive by regularly. Neighbors had been alerted. My first night back, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow seemed threatening. I kept the lights on, moving from room to room, reclaiming my space inch by inch. The following morning, an envelope waited on my front porch. No postage, no address. Just my name scrawled across the front. Inside was a single photograph, me sleeping in Megan's guest room 2 nights ago. He was still watching. I called Rivera immediately. She arrived with forensic techs who swept Megan's house, discovering tiny cameras installed in smoke detectors and air vents. He's escalating, Rivera said gravely. The abandoned car, the blood, it could have been staged, a way to make us think he was gone. That night, I checked into a hotel under a false name, using cash. Rivera stationed an officer in the lobby and another on my floor. I took sleeping pills, desperate for rest. The shrill ring of my phone woke me at 3:17 a.m. We got him, Rivera's voice crackled with static. Caught trying to access your hotel room. He's in custody. Relief flooded through me. It was over. The following days blurred together, providing a formal statement, identifying Mercer in a lineup, learning the horrifying extent of his obsession through items recovered from a storage unit he'd rented, journals detailing my daily routines, maps of my movements, plans for our life together. 2 weeks later, as autumn leaves fell outside my new apartment 50 miles away, Rivera called with unsettling news. Mercer hanged himself in his cell last night. I should have felt relief. Instead, unease settled in my stomach. He left a note, she continued hesitantly. Just 7 words. Tell her I wasn't the only one. That night, alone in my new home with new locks, new security, and new precautions, I felt the familiar sensation of being watched. A subtle shift in the air, a presence just beyond perception. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Edward never could keep secrets. I'll see you soon. I stared at the message, terror and resignation washing over me in equal measure. Somewhere in the darkness beyond my windows, new eyes were watching, waiting, and I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that it was only beginning.